March 26th, 2018 at 9:35. I would like to remind everyone it is being recorded live and live streamed. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda? Any additions? Seeing none, are there any changes to the order of the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda, please? Moved by Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member Quirk. All those in favor? And the agenda is adopted. The first item on the agenda, declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any pecuniary interests? Any pecuniary interests? Seeing none, there are no presentations or delegations this morning. Administrative business, the approval of draft minutes. Item 4.1.1, Source Protection Authority, January 24th, 2018. Any questions or comments concerning the January 24th Source Protection Authority minutes? Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll need a mover and a seconder to adopt those minutes. Moved by Member Jeffs, seconded by Member Timms. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. There are no business arising from the minutes. There are no items of correspondence. Under business for information, there is no business items listed on the agenda. Business for consideration brings us to our first report, item 6.11, the 2017 Annual Progress Report. Members have been provided a copy of that document. It's a very well done document. The report speaks for itself. At this time, I'm going to ask Jamie Campbell to come forward and speak to the 2017 Annual Progress Report. At this time also, what I would like to do is put the following motion on the floor, and we will start with Jamie's presentation. Therefore, everything is on the floor for questions or comments in congruency with Jamie's presentation. So the motion that I'm going to be putting on the floor right now is that report number SPA 0318, respecting the 2017 Annual Progress Report, be received, that the annual and supplemental progress reports attached to report number SPA 0318 as Appendix 1 and 2 be approved and submitted as presented to the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, and that the annual progress report be posted on the Niagara Peninsula Source Protection Authority website. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member Maloney. That report is on the floor for questions or comments. Welcome, Jamie. You can start your presentation anytime.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Annunziata. I hope you'll find this summary of the annual reporting requirements for source protection helpful. For reference, this picture here is looking from the Welland water treatment plant intake, looking at the old Welland Canal. So before 1970, we would have seen ships there, no longer. The Source Protection Authority, yourselves, is required to prepare an annual report. This annual report describes the measures taken to implement the Source Protection Plan, including any results of any monitoring programs and the extent to which the Source Protection Plan objectives have been received. The objectives of the Source Protection Plan are to protect drinking water sources and to ensure threat activities never become significant or cease to be. Perhaps to explain, many of the things that a source protection plan does in Niagara is to prevent certain things occurring, not addressing actual concerns. This map shows the areas where source protection policies apply in Niagara region, within the cities of Thorold, Niagara Falls, Port Colborne, and Welland, as well as the Welland Canal. The Welland Canal being a federal body, we work with the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation to implement policies there through a relationship, not through a stick. The Source Protection Plan came into effect in October 2014, and this second annual report covers 4 years. It's the second because the province hadn't given us a template to do that yet. The province template has the reporting formats that you see before you. There's a detailed supplemental form and the summarized public-facing annual progress report. They use these to prepare part of their annual drinking water inspectors report for the province. Here are the implementers in Niagara who provide us information about how implementing is doing every year. We have 3 provincial ministries: Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, as well as Niagara Region, the cities of Thorold, Niagara Falls, Port Colborne, and Welland, as well as the St. Lawrence Seaway Corporation, Seaway Management Corporation. And there are actually policies that the Conservation Authority has to implement. Those are education and outreach. Get into the summary here, but I like pictures, maybe you do too. Up on the top left, that is a gate that controls flow where the St. Catharines Waterworks Canal crosses the Highway 406. It's immediately south of Lake Gibson. On the top right is the Lake Gibson alternate intake, which was given approval for reuse back in 2010 by the Medical Officer of Health in Niagara Region. The bottom right, we have the Welland Canal intake as well, and then the bottom left is a view to the south, upstream towards Lake Erie from the Port Colborne intake. Progress. So we're 96% implemented of the significant drinking water threat policies. 4% or one policy is in progress with some progress to be made. Of the other policies, we're about half and half. 26 of the significant, 26 of the other. Of the other, 90% are implemented, and in progress are a few items. So what's in progress? Signage is being implemented. It's pretty tricky, actually, to implement signage. As well as the City of Port Colborne has the last policy to be implemented, but they have a longer deadline. Their deadline is next fall, 2019, and that's for a stormwater management plan, so I believe that'll be brought to City of Port Colborne Council for budget approval this year. Land use planning. There were 4 cases where official plans had to be amended. Those have been completed for Thorold, Niagara Falls, Port Colborne, Niagara Region, and 3 zoning bylaw conformity exercises. City of Niagara Falls got theirs done. Thorold and Port Colborne later this year. It's okay. There are no threats existing on the landscape being created. There was just some details in terms of paperwork to be taken care of there. The source protection plan actually tells the province to do certain things. So they have changed their approval processes. For example, when they do approvals, they have to conform with the local policies in the source protection plan. For example, if there's a prohibition policy, they have to refuse an application. They have a screening process now for incoming applications. They look and go, is this in an area that the source protection plan covers? They've trained their staff and they're tracking their applications in regards to this. And they reviewed the existing approvals in Niagara to see if there were any significant drinking water threats, and there were none. Outreach and education. First, I want to thank our staff member, Carrie Royer, as well as our intern from last year, Sam Janjak. They got Yellowfish Road started again. So they did 6 outreach works last year, as well as the Water Festival. If you break down the numbers of the students who came to the Water Festival for where their schools are located, about 2,000 from Niagara Falls and Port Colborne in our intake protection zones there participated in Yellowfish Road at the Water Festival. Social media, this is a new thing to start looking at. Over 1,800 people visited the Source Water website, and social media, we got back on that thanks to Erica last fall in December, 1,200 Facebook reaches and a potential reach of 4,800 on Twitter. To the right is, I think, good fruit. Maria Bellantino-Perco, who's here with me, the chair of the Source Protection Committee, and I were in Port Colborne last October. Very cold, wet day in Port Colborne. And the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation had part of their emergency response team out there practicing deploying a boom. It actually ends up being really complicated, and all the more so when it's cold and wet. And so we're out there all day, and it was good, them learning how to deploy different booms, different ways, and what would be the complexities of that if in the event we had another spill, like what happened in 2010 where diesel fuel impacted the canal there. So it was great to be a part of that. And what has become very vogue, it seems, actually, at fire departments and others in Niagara, is to practice emergency response exercises in regards to drinking water protection. Some positive impact examples. The staff in Niagara Region have had some good success in Port Colborne installing the source water protection signs. And I like these better than what Ministry of Transportation has done. And they have their own things they have to deal with. But the number there below the sign is the Spills Action Center number. Because I was even having a discussion with a communications person. What are people supposed to do with these signs? What do they mean? Well, if you see a spill, this is a particular area to let Spills Action Center know, and then action gets taken. I'm also really pleased the second bullet that we continue to have grant funding for water well decommissioning. So that deals with vertical transport pathways. When people have an old well and it's not properly decommissioned, that was back me in school. That was 101 for protecting aquifers, is get rid of unused wells. And thanks to your support from the board and historically support from the water protection strategy, we continue to address gaps through working with the Ontario Geological Survey on our bedrock aquifer study. Prior to bringing this report to you today, the Source Protection Committee reviewed this information in detail, and they have to give a comment as to their opinion of how the plan is progressing. Their opinion was the plan is progressing well on target, and as it's quoted up there, based on the information provided, the majority of threats have been addressed, and the remaining policies are on track for implementation. This year, what's happening? We look forward to City of Thorold, City of Port Comer finishing their zoning bylaws. Look forward to Yellowfish Road. We have our intern, Corey, who's getting started on that, working with schools and other community groups, as well as at the Water Festival, reminding people that storm sewers are not going to a treatment plant. And so we need to be careful what goes down there. And the third bullet's the big item. We're going to be updating the source protection plan, probably a 2-year process, and we're going to get started on that next week, looking at required municipal updates. There's 4 municipal water treatment plants who will be changing their intakes, improving municipal supply protection, as well as looking how to address groundwater. So thank you very much for your time and attention. If you have any questions, certainly be pleased to receive those now.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll open it up to the board for questions or comments. Member DeFuscio.
They're still dumping. Niagara Falls, New York is still dumping the black water, only they're doing it at 2 a.m. in the morning, so nobody can see it. But the fishermen that are out there all night, they see it.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, Jamie, but it's a good comment, Mickey. And again, we take care of what's in our purview and certainly within our mandate and authority. Unfortunately, we don't really have control what they do on the United States side, but it does impact the overall quality downstream. So thanks for those comments. Any other questions or comments? Member Maloney.
Jamie, I see on several instances there that reference was made to the City of Port Coburn zoning bylaw. Now, that bylaw has taken several years to get to where it is now, and it's supposed to be passed tonight. Is there anything further any further input that's required from the Conservation Authority before this bylaw is passed?
Through you, Chair Annunziata. No, I don't believe so. I've had very good discussions with your staff. It's all been good. And they're reflecting in the zoning bylaw, to the best of my knowledge, what was in the official plan. So, no, I believe in regards to source water protection, things have been progressing well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other members with questions or comments? Jamie, I just have one question for you. And as you know, we've started the process of our next strategic plan review. So I was hoping maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on the relationship with the source water protection mandate and how the NPCA came to be involved with it, and maybe the integration between the provincial, the federal, and the NPCA.
Chair Annunziata, I'll give you a quick answer, but the details are in a different presentation. I'm living in the moment of this one right now. The role of the Conservation Authority as a source protection authority is enshrined in the Clean Water Act legislation. So your role as a source protection authority board, my role as staff, is as a result of that legislation, the Clean Water Act and the regulations that derive from that. Also the existence as a source protection committee.
Okay, thanks for that. And again, part of our role here is certainly to educate people, and an important part of what the Conservation Authority does is source water protection. Just for the benefit of everyone in the gallery and certainly the board, if you wouldn't mind recognizing any of the members of your committee that are with us this morning.
Well, I know the chair, Maria Bellantino-Perco, is here. I'm not aware if any other members are here. And no, but I'm really glad Maria's
Okay,
here.
well, thank you for all the work that you do. Very well done presentation. Seeing no other questions or comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor of receiving the report as well as the presentation? Opposed? And that's carried. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, the next item on the agenda, there is no in-camera business. New business, any items? Seeing none, seeing no further business, I'll need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Member Kasperset, seconded by Member DeFrucio. All those in favor? That is carried. We are now adjourned. Thank you. So we're going to get started with the full authority board meeting. I will call the full authority board meeting to order on Monday, March 26th, 2018 at 9:51. Welcome to all board members. Welcome to members of the gallery. Again, another reminder that the proceedings are being recorded and are being live streamed. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda? Member Beatty.
The vice chair and I have a motion we'd like to add to the agenda.
You can do that under notice of motion.
Okay.
Okay. Any other additions to the agenda? Member Campion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had submitted a letter that has been distributed, and I was hoping that it would be added to the agenda under correspondence. You did contact me and say that you were opposed to doing that. However, it is an item of correspondence. I'd like it added to the agenda.
It has been ruled on. Part of my role is agenda management, and that item will not be going on the agenda, as was relayed to you, Member Campion. Member Beatty.
Yeah, so thank you to that, Chair.
Member Campion.
The reasoning doesn't make any sense to me. I'm simply asking for an opportunity to discuss litigation matters, not a particular one, just litigation in general. I think that it is appropriate for the agenda, so I would challenge that decision.
I have a challenge of the ruling of the chair. That letter has been circulated. It is out of order. That is my ruling. I understand the intent behind the letter. Member Quirk.
Chair, just for clarification, the correspondence that Member Campion is just looking for an update on litigation matters, is that all the correspondence is asking for?
Member Campion is looking for a specific item with respect to litigation. So I'm not going to entertain the letter under the guise of it's now a general request, Member Campion. I think we both
Chair.
know that's not the case.
Chair,
So
correspondence is very specific, is what I'm
hold on,
looking for.
Member
It has
Campion, Member Campion,
no-
Member Campion.
It doesn't
Member
refer to
Campion.
any particular item. Just help me to answer Councillor Quirk's question.
Member
It's
Campion,
a
there is
very
a challenge
general
on the
letter.
floor. My ruling has been challenged. I will put it to a vote with respect to that piece of correspondence on the agenda. All those in favor?
Point of order, Chair.
What is your point of order, Member Quirk?
Member Campion's asking that a piece of correspondence be put on the thing. I'm not sure if all members have seen the correspondence and know what we're talking about. So I'm just out of curiosity, if we're having a motion, put something on the floor that not all of us have seen, I don't think that's generally a fair way of doing it. However, I do know that Councillor Campion, I see the email that was sent by Teresa from your office. I didn't realize what it was because I thought it might have been correspondence, just regular news things. So I don't know if, from the general thrust of it, I don't know why we wouldn't just ask for an update on all litigation and enforcement matters at our next board meeting, as we normally get those.
We can certainly entertain that under new business, and I will be more than happy to entertain that general motion under new business. Member Beatty.
Just a point of order. Where I come from, when the chair is challenged, the gavel goes to the vice chair, and you state your position, and the challenger states his position or her position, and then the board decides whether we're going to move forward. And I see no reason, I have a copy of the letter, it was sent to me, and I see no reason why we simply couldn't deal with it in camera. It's an HR personnel. The mayor wants an answer. I think we should give it to him. But
So-
you should not be, the gavel should move over where I come from.
So the chair's ruling has been challenged with respect to an item of correspondence. I've ruled the letter out of order. To Member Quirk's comments, not all members of the board have seen that letter. I'm ruling it out of order. I've been challenged on that. Members have an opportunity to assess that ruling. I will call for, do you have a second, Member Campion?
Not yet. Yes, I do. Thank you.
Member Beatty? So the question on the floor is to uphold the ruling of the chair. A yes vote upholds the ruling of the chair. A no vote, we move forward. All those in favor of upholding the ruling of the chair? All those opposed? And Member Campion, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So once that is added to the request was to have that added to correspondence, so I now expect that it would be added to correspondence, and then I would like to pull it at that point.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to amend the agenda by adding that piece of correspondence. Again, have members had the opportunity to see that letter? Member Timms?
Happy to read it under correspondence, Chair.
So we'll provide a copy to the board. All those in favor of adding that piece of correspondence to the agenda? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, any changes to the order of the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to need a mover and a seconder to approve the amended agenda. Moved by Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member McPherson. All those in favor? And that's carried. Declarations of conflict of interest. Are any members have any conflicts of interest? Seeing none. Presentations and delegations. At this time, I would ask Mr. Patrick Kennedy from Dillon Consulting Limited to come forward. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I have a very brief presentation to provide a bit of an update on the policy document review project and the update we've been doing, I guess, for the last 2.5 years. And the intent of the presentation is really just an update to let you know what's going to be happening over the next couple of months as we hit the sort of stretch run to wrap this project up, which has been, as I said, something we've been doing for about over 2.5 years now. By way of background, this is an update that we've been working on that speaks to the NPCA's policy document. The document is kind of a complicated technical piece that has to provide guidance to staff in terms of how they make decisions and around their roles as a regulator, or whether they're acting under their authority under the province as a delegated provincial interest, whether they're providing comments on a Planning Act application or or those are sort of the main three functions that the document speaks to, although there are aspects of it that cover the MPCA's role as a service provider and a resource management agency. So the process that we went through is a three-phase process. The first phase was kind of the project launch. Second phase, we had that discussion paper, which was here well over a year ago to present the findings on that. And the final phase that we're on has been trying to wrap up the draft of the policy document. That has involved extensive amount of public and stakeholder engagement. And the final steps in our process are at the bottom of the slide there. We're looking to prepare the final version and have that back to you for board approval. From a consultation engagement perspective, it's just worth highlighting because it has been some time since I was last in front of you. The process was that in the spring last year we had 5 rounds or 5 different public events in the watershed. The comment period was extended over the summer into the fall and then extended again at the request of the board to the end of December. So I've been working with staff the last couple of months to address those comments. We heard quite a bit, both through those public engagement exercises, but also we got feedback from written in the form of letters from members of the public and also from various agencies. And you can see for those of you that did come out to the event, some of them were very well attended. I think we had about 115 people and got a lot of good feedback from the face-to-face exercises. We got at least 10 written submissions from these different agencies, and a lot of the commentary was fairly direct and very specific, either basically of a technical nature or an administrative nature. And one board member also provided his own personal written comments as well that we have to we'll be looking to address. So without going through everything in a great amount of detail, I thought before we come back to you with a recommended document that it's helpful for you to understand what the nature of the comments we received were. In general, the one major big comment is just to make sure all the policies do align specifically with the CA's authority under the regs. That was the comment this board communicated to me from day one, so that's something we continue to fine-tune to make sure the policies are exactly and not straying too far from the limits of the legislation. So around this, there were some comments around clarifying the authority's role to require a permit for development in spill areas, trying to clarify the regulatory limits for erosion hazards. Basically, in some places in the legislation, we can regulate up to 15 meters. In the policy document, we're regulating 7.5, and that's based on practice. That's what we've done, so we're regulating less than we have the authority to do. Provide additional background on some of the water course buffer requirements and be clear on some of the setbacks. Those were sort of the very specific technical comments, but they do speak to alignment with the regulation. That's something we're going to have to tidy up in the final draft. And then it depended also kind of on where we went. When we were out in Niagara Falls, a lot of the comment was general, but a lot of the feedback we got in person was making sure wetlands are protected and the policies are in place. So these are people who came out to the event interested because of an issue, and they hadn't been as familiar with the policy documents. So it was a good opportunity to do a little bit of back and forth and education on what the Conservation Authority does and doesn't do, and what the policies are around wetland protection. I would say one of the more consistent comments that came out from meeting to meeting was there is a section in the policy document that talks about the studies that the CA can request from an applicant to help make a decision. And it doesn't provide any context. The current policy we drafted, it just lists a whole bunch of studies and says the CA can request these studies. And I think there's some fear that is a bit of a grab, getting a private landowner to do a study without any guidance about when or why it's needed is a gap. So that's something we have to close. And that the intent of that section is really where you have larger, more complicated development applications that you need some answers about what the risks are, and you need a study done, and that's what the intent of the policy is. So we'll have to clean that up. I would say in general, the floodplain policies received the most attention. We had quite active participation from members of the floodplain committee and other members of the public at our public events. And they provide a very thorough submission for us to work with about some of the changes they'd like to see. In general, they're looking for more flexibility for minor forms of development, that these things that are basically negligible or not expected to have a significant increase in risk shouldn't be subject to permits and approvals. More flexibility for those that already exist in the floodplain as a matter of principle, and that, again, the cut and fill policies should also have more flexibility in them as well. So overarchingly, the comment was for a little more flexibility in our draft floodplain policies. One of the innovations in the document is there is kind of a minor variance type policy in there that allows staff at the board to provide some relief whether an application doesn't quite fit a standard for a technical reason, and so we've introduced that, and generally people thought that was a good addition. We got a lot of sort of, I would say, small scale stuff, and I'm not going to go through them all, but it's just about language in the document, like one of the big ones being to not call it the living landscape policy document. That was what we called the process for more branding and advertising reasons, and that's not, so the final one you see will just be simply called the policy document, and a few other tips around definitions and the term permit to be consistent with how we refer to it in the document, so to be referred to as a works permit, which is the nomenclature staff use. A few mapping changes to simply update the recently updated provincial plans. We had a few provincial maps in the document that need to be updated, and some references to the Endangered Species Act also required, and a few other tips just around abbreviations and, as I said, mapping. So it's a bit of a laundry list, and that's kind of a snapshot of the nature of it. The list is actually a little bit longer, but there's a lot of comments of that nature, very specific changes, clarification in a few places to do. So the next steps we are proposing is trying to sit down with the floodplain committee with the revised floodplain policies in April, share those policies in advance with them, and in the hopes of getting some consensus on those policies together, and we'll bring back a final policy document to the board in May is the game plan today. So happy to answer any questions. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. So we're going to go around the table and any question or comments. Member DeFrucio.
I read there was a report in the Toronto Star just a couple of weeks ago. I meant to cut it out and I forgot it, about the wetlands. It says the smaller the wetlands, the small wetlands, they're just as productive as the bigger ones. In some cases, they're more productive. And that was done by the M&R in Ontario. So, I don't know. So all wetlands should be protected, no matter how big or how small.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Mickey. I'm not sure if that was a question.
We'll take that
Patrick.
comment under advisement and see if it necessitates a change to the policies.
Okay. Thanks, Mickey. Moving around the table, any other question or comments? Member Beattie.
Yes, could you give us some time frame, meeting with the floodplain committee in April?
Yep.
Do we have a time and location?
I'm gonna defer to Greg on
Okay.
that.
Yep. Mr. Fertney?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We do not have a concrete date as of yet. We're looking towards the third or fourth week of April with the Watershed Committee, which is made up of board members primarily, and also the Welland River Floodplain Association. And we're going to have a kind of a joint meeting, and we'll also invite any of the other members who were not on any of those committees as well to participate in that. Yes, sir. We're looking at least a 2-week notice for the invitation.
Member Beattie? Good. Yeah. Any other question or comments? Member Quirk?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, this board on a couple occasions extended the deadlines for commenting. Just out of curiosity, did we get any further comments after we had extended the deadline from the various groups that have been asking for it?
Mr. Kennedy?
Okay. Thank you.
Seeing no other question or comments, Patrick, thank you for your work on this. I know it's been a long process, but hopefully you take comments from the board back and add them to the consultation remarks. So thanks for your presentation. Our next delegate this morning is Mr. Ken DiPodesta from KD Squared Consulting. Welcome, Mr. DiPodesta. Put your mic on and you have the floor.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair Annunziata. And through you, Chair Annunziata, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the board today. The topic for today, and I am the audiovisual experience here, I'm just going to speak to you. I like to think that with 45 years of experience in consulting engineering, that I might bring a little bit of a perspective to the table today that would perhaps serve to be a conscience of sorts for the board members. The 45 years that I've spent in the engineering business has been in the private sector. I have certainly not been part of a public agency like the Conservation Authority, but I've spent a lot of time, particularly in my earlier years as a junior engineer, producing floodplain mapping. And all of the technical components of that, I go back far enough in my 45 years to remember when tools like HECRAS, which allows for production of flood levels that would become flood lines. I used to do a lot of that work actually by hand. At the time that those kinds of tools weren't available. And I'm not saying that the lines that were produced by hand were any better or any worse than the lines that are produced now, because it's all about the information that goes into the process of determining levels and then the manifestation of those levels in floodlines. I would put to you that my experience in doing floodline mapping and my experience in flood mitigation works like Cambridge and a number of other sites in Ontario is fairly substantial. So I do come from a perspective on this that gives you perhaps a bit of a grassroots look at floodplain management. The regulations, in my opinion, are the key. The policies are the tools, the guidance with which the regulations are applied. And what I would say is that the regulations, when they were created back in prior to 2000, and I think it was in 2006, that the NPCA, the Regulation of Development Interference with Wetlands and Alterations to Shorelines and Watercourses, was adopted. Prior to that, the issue really is the degree to which the Conservation Authority should be operating in accordance with regulations and whether or not policies need to change to look after the interests of those individuals who own property and those public agencies that own property within floodplains. Building in a floodplain is an opportunity because the regulations were intended to be permissive when they were written. I'm not sure if anybody in the room remembers a fellow by the name of Don Greer, but Don Greer was a staff person at the Grand River Conservation Authority and then went to the Ministry of Natural Resources and applied his planning expertise to the production of the regulations. No policies, regulations. The regulations were intended to be permissive and simply stated a building can be put in a floodplain if the tests associated with the regulations are adhered to. And those tests are, will not increase flooding, will not exacerbate local erosion, will not increase pollution, will not adversely affect dynamic beaches, and will not jeopardize the conservation of land. If those tests, and those tests are applied to each and every site that regulations would apply to within a floodplain, if those tests are met, then a permit needs to be issued. Now, I would say to you that every site within a floodplain has different characteristics, and the closer you get to a watercourse, the more significant the issues become. But there are numerous locations within floodplains, and it's not just at within the NPCA jurisdiction. It's within all Conservation Authority jurisdictions that would, upon close examination and upon modeling that would need to take place to understand whether or not there's an adverse impact from the point of view of flooding, there are cases where fill permits can and should be issued. I'm proud to be here today to let you know that your Conservation Authority has issued a fill permit to me for a property within the floodplain. Granted, it was in the marginal extents of floodplain in an urban area, and I'm expecting to receive another fill permit for a more rural site. There are technical issues that need to be addressed satisfactorily for those permits to be issued. One of them is access and egress to the site that should not be, and we're talking about road systems now, should not be greater than, flooding over the road should not be greater than 1 foot. That is in compliance with the provincial policy statement, the PPS. The second component of that is with respect to the modeling, hydraulic modeling within the floodplain for the site that's being addressed from a fill permit application point of view. The closer you get to the creek, the closer you get to the watercourse, the greater the likelihood is that there's an impact. But the issue of cumulative effect is not part of the regulations. The issue of cumulative effect, to the extent that cut and fill balance and things like this are required, don't find themselves as part of the regulation. They find themselves as part of the policies. And I would urge this Conservation Authority, as I would be urging other conservation authorities, to look carefully at the way in which the policies are being created, and this is not a criticism of what is going on at this point in time, because I have no idea of what the policy document that is being prepared now includes or doesn't include. But I would say that it's important that we get back to grassroots and we deal with the regulations as they were intended to be dealt with. And that's in a permissive way. If we can visualize a glass of water with a point to which water has found its way into that glass, we can look at it two ways. We can look at it as a glass half full. We can also look at it as a glass half empty. And I think for us going forward, those people who care about floodplain management, those people that care about the environment, there's nothing wrong with taking a half glass full permissive perspective on the issuance of fill permits. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here through you, Chair Annunziata.
Mr. DePodesta, I'm going to open up to members of the board, so just stay right there for any questions or comments. Member Joyner.
So thank you for your presentation, sir. I'm kind of thinking of this question on the fly here, so work with me a little if you could. So my question to you is, well, I'm very interested to hear that you say that cut and fill should be the glass half full, not the glass half empty. That's the way you should look at it. And I'm very keen on hearing the fact that you say that these tests that should determine whether or not. My question to you is that if you do a cut and fill, where is the test, which one of those tests, and you listed them off, when you do the cut and fill, the water's got to go somewhere. So what is the test to determine where that water is going to empty out into?
Mr. DiPodesta?
Yes, through you, Chair Annunziata. Cut and fill analysis should not be the only test that's applied. In fact, it is a method of evaluating what the impact is. In most cases where we're talking about properties that exist near the extents, in the outer limits of the floodplain, cut and fill, in my opinion, isn't required. A balance of cut and fill is not required because the analysis will show, the hydraulic analysis will show, that there is no adverse impact on any other property if filling on its own is undertaken. Every property that's within the floodplain needs to be dealt with individually. I would agree that there are numerous properties within any floodplain that would have to have a balance in cut and fill in order to demonstrate that there is no adverse impact by way of filling. You couldn't fill without having an impact, without cutting. But there are properties where cut and fill is not required. Fill only can be demonstrated not to have an adverse flooding impact. Does that answer the question through you, Chair?
Member Joyner?
Maybe. I'm thinking through this. So my next question would be, how many cut and fills should you have within a certain area? And I'm not talking about a rural area, I'm talking about an urban area. So how many of those should you have within a 2-kilometer length? Does it matter?
No,
it
doesn't.
Is there a number that says that, once you have 3 or 4, that's too many?
No, there isn't. I think you take each property as it was intended, each property on its own. You deal with each property. You don't deal with the cumulative effect. You don't deal with more than one property at a time. When a fill permit application comes in, it's for one property. I'm not talking about a subdivision development now. I'm talking about individual properties. It's not an assemblage of property and evaluating it from a cut and fill or a non-cut and fill perspective. It is a single property likely owned by a private individual who wants to do something on that property, might want to put a house on that property. And by filling for the building footprint, the prospect would be that it can be shown, as I've shown it, on that urban property that I mentioned, that filling alone does not have an adverse impact on any other property from a flooding perspective. Water levels don't change. Doesn't apply in every case. Each case has to be looked at on its individual merits. Where it is in the floodplain, the character of the area, excuse me.
What about volume of flow, sir? Do you need some water? Do you need some water?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about volume of flow, though?
And what do you mean by volume?
Well,
Are you talking?
if you have rushing water and you have not a straight line in a creek, a river, a tributary, and water is meandering through, and it's springtime, and it's a high flow volume of water, and you've done a cut and fill, which means that you've lessened the body, the length, the width of the canal of which the water travels. Does not that water have to empty out somewhere? Don't you call that somewhat of a bathtub effect? Doesn't it have to go somewhere?
When the floodplain mapping is done, the floodplain mapping shows the furthest extent of flooding based on contours, based on topography, that a particular flow will go to. The flows that are used for floodplain mapping are determined in accordance with the technical requirements. It's typically called a regulatory flood event, and in the case of Niagara, it's the 100-year event. So that flow is determined by technical people that say, under these rainfall conditions and under these what would be called antecedent moisture conditions, soil conditions, the wetness of soils, all of those technical parameters come together and you end up with a flow.
Right.
The flow is inserted into a hydraulic model. The cross sections that establish that hydraulic model are either field surveyed or they're extracted from detailed, accurate mapping. Those sections are concatenated into what essentially is a three-dimensional model and parameterized for all of the bits and pieces that you need to have parameters for. That model is run for that flow in a static sense. That wave doesn't find its way through the reach that you're modeling. That flow is applied to each and every cross section in a backwater, a standard step type methodology. And what you end up with is you end up with a flow, or sorry, a flood level that is mapped against contour mapping. So in the case of a big flow coming through a reach and finding its tortuous way, it's that limit is already addressed, should have been addressed in the floodplain mapping delineation.
Okay. Okay. So my last question through you, Mr. Chair, is if you could sum it up, what is your number one point for being here today to teach us or to talk to us about cut and fill, permits and building in the floodplain?
I'm not here to talk to you about cut and fill.
It says fill permits and building in the floodplain.
Yeah.
So what was your number one point?
Not all properties require cut and fill.
Okay. Okay.
Every property within any floodplain needs to be dealt with in a permissive way. And what I'm saying there doesn't mean that you issue a permit. You look at each and every property when an individual brings an application in. You look at each and every individual property consistently. And I'm not saying that you don't.
Okay.
I'm just saying that's what needs to happen. Because a floodplain delineation, a floodplain map, does not mean that only properties outside the floodplains are developable. I think that's my message.
Okay, so I lied, Mr. Chair. I have one more question.
No worries.
So in saying that, sir, why are you here today? Are you here because NPCA staff had you come here? Are you acting on behalf of someone else? Like,
No.
What is the message and why today is this on our agenda?
I think it's where I've been successful in.
But who asked you to come here today is what I'm trying to say, trying to get out. How did you arrive here on our agenda today?
I spoke to Chair Annunziata and I asked whether or not I could appear.
Okay.
Because the Conservation Authority has issued 2 permits to me, and I think that for properties within floodplains,
Right.
and that I think the message should get out to other conservation authorities in Ontario about the leadership that this conservation authority is showing with respect to the issuance of fill permits within floodplain designations.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. DePotesta. I apologize. I know member joiners asked a lot of questions. I think I just want to be clear as a follow-up to his question about why you're here today. And I think I heard you say that the regulations are there to be permissive. And that applies to almost all our regulations, does
That's
it
right.
not? And the whole point is that before you get approval to do something, we have some pretty good staff to make sure that all the boxes are checked before they issue a permit.
That's right.
There are a set of requirements to meet to get those permits.
Yes.
So we've had situations in the past where, because people have taken it on themselves to do fills within wetlands, within floodplains, without going through that permitting process, we, as a board this time, have taken some criticism for enforcing the need to get those permits. But it's not an onerous process to get those permits. Is that in your things? It's just a rigid process to make sure that all the boxes are checked.
No, it's a process that can be dealt with. It does cost to do that, as it should. It's important for the Conservation Authority's floodplain mapping to be as accurate as it can be, because it really should show, I used to do this work, it should show where the floodplain, the limits of the floodplain are. And people that own those properties, either inside or outside, can decide whether or not the risk is worth, and I'm talking about spending money now, the risk is worth the effort.
And to that point, obviously, we're just going through the finalization of the Welland floodplain. We're about to start I'm going to get the creek number wrong, but is it the 12 Mile Creek or the 20 Mile Creek? I never get the numbers right. That process, but as part of the previous presentation, the floodplain policies and mapping policies are going to be talked to at the floodplain committee. Have you had a chance to review those? Or
No.
When those come forward, I think you said the distinction between policies and regulations, the tools versus the outcomes, those are the sort of things that your commentary would be useful to have as that comes to us, because it's supposed to come to us for final approval in May. So any comment that could be provided either as another delegation or correspondence when you take a look at those, I think would be appreciated from someone who's gone through the experience.
I appreciate the offer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair.
Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming to make the point about where the policy can allow exceptional circumstances on specific circumstances on specific properties. And I'm wondering if you're thinking or concerned that the policy needs to make that clear in the statement of the policy?
I believe that's the case, through you, Chair.
Okay.
I do believe that. I would like to say as well that the number, if we're all grappling to have me say this, how many of these are there out there? Mm-hmm. It depends. It depends. It's not thousands. It's difficult when you take a floodplain map. It's difficult to find properties that adhere to the standards that are applied by me in looking at different properties as to whether or not a fill permit and the issuance of a fill permit is likely or not. And I mentioned as one of the criteria safe access and egress. If the road that you would use to leave your property or come to your property is flooded by greater than 1 foot, which is a provincial policy statement warrant, if it's flooded to a greater extent than 1 foot, then it doesn't meet the criteria that I would expect it to meet for me to even look at the hydraulic analysis. So I would toss that particular property aside and say it doesn't fit the criteria.
So your concern, and what my concern would be, that the policy does make it clear what circumstances might allow, what the tests are,
yes,
and what the circumstances are. Because I can imagine a property owner going to the bank and saying, I want to borrow that based on the value of my property, and the bank saying, well, the policy says you can't ever do anything with this, so that affects the value. Whereas if the policy says under these circumstances you can do something, at least the owner would have that bit of defense when speaking to the value of his property with the mortgage.
Yeah, there would have to be some technical work done.
Yeah.
to support what the owner of the property wants to say to the bank.
So it needs to be clear in the policy.
needs to be
so
clear.
everybody can make use of
Yeah.
the details of the policy.
Yeah.
The other question I wanted to ask you about was, we've talked about kind of a two-stage policy in the floodplain or two-zone policy in floodplains. Have you had any experience with that? And specifically the fill permits you talked about, would they fit into the two-zone or the light zone?
A two-zone policy is just a different way of defining what a floodplain is. And the policies that would apply, or the issues, the criterion that would apply to the main floodway versus the flood, call it the flood fringe, it's different, it's just different criteria. But you need to sort out that criterion as part of your policies and how you would deal with the requirement for cut and fill, for example, in there. You have to look at each of those areas of the floodplain, floodway, and define it within your policy document so that it's clear.
I think that's where we're headed, but I just wondered if you had any experience with a two-zone policy anywhere else in the province.
Not that really applies to what I'm talking about here.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Mr. DePodesta, for your presentation. And just to follow up on, oh, sorry, Member Jeffs, did you have a question?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's not for our presenter, but just in the future, can we have more specifics included with the delegations in our agenda package? Like, do we have, usually there's a little bit more, we might have a sheet of what they're going to present on or include their presentation. So like Mayor Joyner had to kind of tease out, you know, why our presenter was here today. And I know in the past, it seems like we have more specific information as to why somebody's appearing as a delegation.
Sure.
So could we have that moving forward?
So moving forward, I do know that speaking notes or a loose draft of the presenter on what he's going to be presenting on is included in our agenda package. To Mr. DePodesta's point, I think most of that knowledge is in his head, but we'll make sure that moving forward, any delegation at least provide a bit of a brief so it properly informs the board. So thank you for that observation, Member Jeffs. So just to follow up on Member Quirk, maybe Mr. DePodesta, just following the process of the flood mapping exercises that the Conservation Authority is presently going through and providing your comments, that'd be appreciated. Okay.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DePodesta.
Thank you.
Moving on to administrative business, approval of draft minutes. So I will need a mover that the minutes of the full authority meeting held on February 28th, 2018 be approved as presented. Can I get those on the floor, please? Moved by Member Shurton, second by Member Kaspersets. Questions or comments to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving those minutes? And that's carried. Thank you. Business arising from those minutes? Are there any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, brings us to correspondence. We do have two pieces of correspondence, one which was added at a late date this morning, and another letter, 4.3.1, a letter dated March 20th, 2018, from the Niagara River Ramsar Site Steering Committee respecting withdrawal of request for endorsement Ramsar designation for Niagara River. I'm going to ask that one just be bundled with the business for information, because we do have a report, and Natalie Green is here to answer any questions on that one. So maybe we can just move that piece of correspondence to that particular time frame. Member Quirk?
I guess I would move that the correspondence 4.3.1 be considered with the information report number 5.1, number 3218.
Okay, seconded by Member Jeffs. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. The other item for correspondence is Member Campion's letter, which was added this morning. Any other questions or comments with respect to that piece of correspondence? Member Campion.
Oh, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board, for allowing this to be added to the agenda today. It's an item I've been working on for about a month now through the Chair and our CAO. It's taken me a while to get it here based on the fact that I've been faced with a lot of issues that would make it so that we can't speak to it. So what I've done is I've worded the letter in such a way that it's very general in terms. And really what it talks to is, I guess over the last month and a half or so, or month, my inability to be able to bring an item of litigation forward for discussion, either in camera and open session. So I've taken a generalist approach to this so that it can be spoken to in open session under correspondence, and then see where it goes from there. My issue is that if you read the letter, often we enter into litigation and follow through with litigation, and the results of the litigation are either below expectation or we have a higher expectation than we really should have. Litigation should only be entered into for very, very specific reasons. Quite often you take a shot across the bow with a threat of litigation, but to actually continue on with it has cost. It has financial costs associated with it, and it also has a cost to the reputation and the ability of an organization to continue on. We've seen that, and so having said all that, I think we need to, as a board, have more input, or at least the ability to determine if we are going to continue with litigation. It's a staff matter. I don't disagree with that in many cases. However, we do have the ability to provide direction through the chair to the CAO to take certain actions. So when we look at all sorts of different types of litigation, we litigate when there's non-compliance, normal operating business. Okay, so those ones just happen. Things outside of that, outside of our normal business, are quite different. And we have to look at reasons why we're doing it and what's the return. So if we win the litigation, do we lose the battle? So when we can see that happen. So the board and the NPCA, with Mr. Brickle at the helm, is actually turning the channel. I've seen a lot of good things happening. We've got great staff. We've got great policies in place. We're making a difference. We're proactive. We're doing things. We're producing materials that explain what we're doing. They look great. They tell you a lot of information. We just had a report card on water quality. I thought that was a very, very well done piece. The water quality is poor, and we recognize that, and we say it. So we're being open and transparent. We're telling people what's going on. However, it doesn't take much to turn that good story and the good news into a very negative bad news story. So the bad news overtakes the good news. Always happens, always will. So we have to weigh what is the value of continuing or entering into litigation. Do we gain $100,000? Do we gain $50,000 and we lose our reputation? We win, but there's no opportunity for that person to pay. Does it turn into a bad news story? And so what I'm looking for right now is simply to have the ability. I've been told 3 times that we don't have any input in that. That's not right. Okay? It affects our policies. It affects how we operate. It affects everybody around this table, your reputation, your ability to lead, good governance. All of those things are called into question if we don't do things properly. So I'm interested in having a discussion on the return on investment. So we're going to go to litigation. If we lose, really bad. If we win, depending on what that litigation is all about, we lose. So why don't we have an ability to sit down in camera and discuss these things? Not about getting a report. It's about determining, do we want to continue? Do we want to enter into, as far as what does it mean to the overall health of the corporation? So that's what I'm looking for right now. I don't want to get into details because we would have to go into closed session, but I've been refused the opportunity to go into closed session twice already, and this letter almost didn't make it to correspondence. So we need to be able to deal with those things. I'm asking that direction be provided to the chair, to direct staff, to have an in-camera session where we can actually discuss some of these things. I would be happy to, through the chair, provide information that I would like to talk about in the in-camera session for distribution as confidential information. So that's all I'm asking for, is this ability to do it. I'd like to do it at the next meeting in camera, and I'll explain everything. I would be happy to go in camera right now, today, and discuss my items, but I don't think it would be fair to anybody around the table. Certainly wouldn't be fair to staff because they don't have legal here or the right people here. So we need to have a good, I'm not trying to hijack anything, I'm just asking for opportunity. It makes sense for us to do that, and that's what my correspondence is about. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Member Campion. Any question or comments? Going to Member Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Well, since we don't actually have a motion on the floor with respect to the correspondence item, I move that correspondence from Member Campion be received and that the Chair be directed to include an agenda item to discuss litigation and enforcement matters in closed session at the next board meeting. Second by Vice Chair.
Okay, duly moved and seconded. Any question or comments to the motion that's on the floor? Member Casper, Member Shurton, sorry.
Just for clarification, if Member Campion can mention, so what I'm sensing is that we have some litigation that's been going on that I get a sense hasn't been productive enough to continue. Is that what I'm hearing, Member Champion?
Point of order, Chair. That can't be discussed in open session.
So, yeah. So, well, no. So, yeah, with all due respect, just because, and I'll try to answer the best way I can, we can have 2, 3, 4 potential litigations going on, but if in fact we only have one litigation currently, then unfortunately it will speak to that one. So I hope that answers your question, why we maintain these things in high confidence. Any other question or comments to Member Quirk's motion? Member Timms.
Thank you. I would like to support Member Quirk's motion and understand Member Campion's concern. We have, over the years, had discussions about whether we want to pursue litigation on various enforcement issues. And that I think we all understand how that works. If this is heading into the areas of some HR, human resources issues, then clearly it has to be dealt with in camera. And if it will be helpful, I think, if we get the legal opinions on how the proper way to deal with those things and what lies within the authority of the board as a board of directors and what lies within the authority of the CAO and the human resources department. So I think this motion allows us to have that discussion, and in camera is probably appropriate, and then perhaps there'll be some response publicly after that in terms of the roles, but I think it needs to be clearly defined as a result of that, where the roles and the boundaries are, because it's becoming increasingly popular to take any human resources issue into the public forum and to try and engage board members for public discussion where it's really counterproductive to the, I guess, the discipline or the way in which you deal with human resources, and it sort of undermines the authority of the management when every human resources issue might end up in a public discussion at a board level. And that's where I think it becomes dangerous in terms of the corporation, both municipal and in this case. So I think the motion is very helpful, and that the in-camera session will be very helpful to define those kind of boundaries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I appreciate your comments. So I have a motion duly moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Caspers. It's on the floor. I will take that as direction that closed session item be added to the agenda for the next meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is Chairman's remarks. Specifically, I just would like to address Member Campion's concern. Ultimately, any items of correspondence or issues that come before this board are weighed against our internal policies and certainly our legislative obligations and responsibilities. So there's a vetting process, and if any of those issues are counter or don't correspond to what our policies are currently in place, then it's simply an out-of-order item. We've had many motions from local councils that don't necessarily correspond with our internal policies or what our legislative responsibilities are. Ultimately, the goal of agenda management is to make sure that this board upholds its fiduciary responsibility with respect to our internal policies. So with all due respect to Member Campion, he has spoken with me on the past on this particular issue. I've advised him that on 3 occasions that it was out of order, but I respect the will of this board by the nature of what politics is. Sometimes it's adversarial, but I respect Member Campion's intent to bring it forward, and I respect the will of this board. So that item will be discussed in closed session at our next board meeting. Those are all my comments, and I'll turn it over to our CAO for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of good news items today. Wanted to introduce, if he's still here, is Eric still here? Yeah, Eric Gervais. He's our new procurement specialist coming to us from Brock University with great qualifications, already making a huge difference with respect to our procurement and purchasing policies, and I think he's going to fill some key gaps there, so we're really pleased to welcome Eric. Thank you, Eric. I had the pleasure of presenting the 8 initiatives which the board has approved in principle and are, we're working through as part of the strategic plan. Had the opportunity to go to Lincoln Council and present those. Just wanted to, through you, Member McPherson, pass on to Council, Lincoln Council, what a warm reception the NPCA had, what a great productive conversation we had. The many positives with respect to potential partnership opportunities and collaboration opportunities really was, it was great, and just appreciated Town Council for that great reception and the time we spent together. Hawk Watch is coming up this Friday, that's Good Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. out at Beamer. We'll also be doing a ribbon cutting ceremony. I would imagine that'll take place around noon to actually officially open the new platforms that are now in place. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at them. They are phenomenal and really actually create such a spectacular new vantage point. Of even greater importance, they're accessible, and you'll actually be able to, once it dries up a little bit, or if people have the right wheelchairs, they'll actually be able to take a wheelchair and actually go out and see the spectacular views from the viewing platforms out at Beamer. There's been a couple questions raised about the Sunshine List and why NPCA is not listed on that list. The province changed the methodology for reporting on that, and that methodology was that we would report online what that would be. However, when we went to do that, it came up with a thing that said you had to disclose whether you in fact received at least $1 million in funding from the province or 10% of your funding from the province to even be eligible. We had to, of course, attest to the fact that we do not meet that criteria. We only receive about 4% of our funding, and that represents about $430,000 roughly. So then I actually followed up with staff and said, can we submit voluntarily? Can we find that out? Because once we did that, we were not eligible to submit. We're not captured within the legislation on that grounds, those grounds. So I did ask if we could voluntarily submit our information, and we were told we could not. So that's, I just want you to be aware of that. There's nothing sneaky about that. We're not trying to not disclose, simply following provincial legislation, and just wanted to be clear. Really pleased to see in the audience today, and I know you're going to be dealing with it later, but Treetop Trekking and Stefan and Mike, great to see you guys here today. Thank you for hanging in there all this time with us and working towards an agreement to get that Treetop Trekking project underway at Binbrook. It's been a long process. Hopefully today we'll have some good news and be able to take that to the next level, but pleased to see you here. Thank you. Also would acknowledge the Friends of Fort Erie Creeks are here. They're also in your discussions, and if you have questions related to that proposal, you'll be able to ask them directly. We too are starting to do some great collaboration, starting to work together, much as a result of Trillium Foundation grant that they received, and that allows us to do some work together. So thank you for being here. And then finally, just based on that last conversation, I guess I'd comment on two things. One being the presentation that we heard from Mr. Podesta today. That's actually an example of how staff really work to understand the circumstances of a particular property. And we will have to take a look at the policies and some of the implications for that, because quite frankly, staff was cynical when they saw it, they looked at it, and they did not rely on Mr. Podesta's words or his own expertise or claims. Instead, they sought an independent peer review to see whether that in fact was the case and whether what he was saying was accurate and true. It turned out in this instance it was. So I commend staff for the extra effort that they made and the due diligence they undertook to truly understand that property. But that's often the way it is, that we have to look at the watershed property by property, and certainly floodplains property by property. And then finally, with respect to the matter that you just raised with respect to legal matters, for certainty, board members, you're always able to seek an update on any legal matter that we are dealing with. So that can be dealt with in closed session. We look forward to updating you at the next board meeting.
Any questions or comments with respect to our CAO's comments? Seeing none, we will move on. Item 5 on the agenda, business for information. 5.1.
Chair, sorry, just
Yes.
to that point,
Member
I
Quirk?
apologize. Just because the CAO mentioned that we have two organizations that are waiting in the audience for us to do with certain business, and we've got a lot of business in front of them, would it be, I know we've already talked to the order of the agenda, but would it be appropriate to defer all business up until the treetop trekking report and request for Friends of Fort Erie's? I'd like to defer all business until those two reports have been done, and then continue along with the agenda, only because there's going to be, the strategic plan I think is going to take a lot of time and discussion, and I think in fairness to the people who have made the effort to be here today, that if we could put those forward, it would be worthwhile.
So I have no problem revisiting the order of the agenda. I'll take that as advice to the chair. At this time, I will accept that advice. Having said that, I will ask Treetop Trekking and report 6.2.1, Treetop Trekking at Binbrook Conservation Area, report number 34-18. So I'm going to ask the following resolution, put it on the floor for question or comments. At that particular time, if any member of the board has questions, we have gentlemen here that hopefully can answer them for us. So that report number 3418, respecting Treetop Trekking at Binbrook Conservation Area, be received, and that the draft lease agreement with Treetop Trekking for its operations at Binbrook Conservation Area attached to report number 34-18 as Appendix 1 be approved. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Beattie. That report is on the floor for question or comments. At this time, I'll ask the gentleman from Treetop Trekking to come forward. Just because I don't want your visit here to be in vain. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for your patience. So that report is on the floor for question or comments. Any question or comments around the board? Member Quirk.
First of all, I would just like to say thank you to our staff for bringing this forward, and to all the work that the previous board has done with respect to the Binbrook Master Plan process. This is one of those good news stories with ways to find revenue streams outside of going to the taxpayer, and we've talked about how this year is the first year that we have all 4 of our revenue generating facilities in the black, generating profit, not being subsidized by the taxpayer, but providing revenues to do all the important things that we do as an authority outside of just the regulatory side of things. So on that point, I'd actually like to thank Treetop Trekking for your patience in getting to this point. I don't see any red flags on the report. I thank the staff for going back and having a more thorough discussion about the impact. But I think this is a good first step, and I look forward to hooking up my zip line at some point in the near future to try it out. So thank you. That's all. I have no questions, just comments in support of the report and the agreement.
Thank you, Member Quirk. Member Shurton.
Thank you. Through the chair, just for clarification, I know I was out at Binbrook. I was under the understanding this was already a go-ahead. Are we just here today because of the lease agreement, and that's what's held the delay? So it's taken us 2 years to get a lease?
Okay, we'll get an answer for you. CAO?
Thank you. Very reasonable question. Of course, it's not been the lease that's been the problem. We've had multiple problems. We first were looking to have this venture located here at Balls Falls. We actually had a review done and confirmed that it would be very challenging to go through the process that would be required to get there, though possible in the future, and we'll take a look at that. The main thing has been that we had to conduct an EIS, just as everyone else does, to confirm the environmental impacts that would be entailed and what we have to deal with, and go through the planning approval process with the City of Hamilton. So those have been the things that have actually taken the greatest amount of time.
Member Shurton?
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I knew it had to be more than this, but it was good explanations. Thank you.
Member Beatty?
Yes, the first comment I have is that I'm going to vote for this. I think it's a great idea. What's the status of the Hamilton approvals?
Mr. CAO?
The application's been prepared, and I believe it's just going to Hamilton Council for formal approval. Should be happening, I assume, within the month, right? Friday? Thank you.
Which department is it going to? Building department? Land?
It's actually now going to council for actual approval.
Oh.
It's already been through.
It's already been through staff?
Through planning, yes.
It's already been through?
Yes.
We should attend that one. Question for you guys?
Yes.
You have one of these operating at a CA somewhere in Ontario, is my understanding?
Yeah, that's correct. We actually have 3 that are operating within conservation authorities in Ontario. Heart Lake Conservation Area, Bruce's Mill Conservation Area, and the Ganaraska Forest.
The one closest to us?
Would be at Heart Lake Conservation Area in Brampton.
Okay. The area councilor for the city of Hamilton has asked for a tour. I hope you can accommodate in the near future.
Be happy to. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe the one in Bruce Mill will be more interesting because we propose to have a tree walk village also.
And when would that be operational?
We are in operation.
Yeah, we're
in
open
operation
for the
now?
season now, yeah.
Oh, okay. So maybe through staff we can coordinate a visit day?
Definitely, yeah.
So we'll take that as staff direction, and certainly any members of the board that would like first-hand experience and a tour, we'll take that into consideration.
And further to that, could you let James and I know when it's going to council?
And that's direction to staff as well, so if our Hamilton members can be apprised of that process at Hamilton City Council. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Member Maloney?
Has the lease agreement been submitted to our legal counsel for comment?
CAO?
Yes.
Maloney? Thank you. Oh, member, well, let's go to Member Kaspersets, and we'll go to Member Timms.
All right, through the chair, just to you gentlemen, and also back to our staff. I think this is fantastic. I live in Stony Creek. I can't wait. What happens in the event that this doesn't work for you guys?
Well, I think that's what we think that will be a sad moment for us. Obviously, we pursued this venture with Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority since about 4 or 5 years. So we think it's a win-win for the community and for our organization and for your organization also.
and we think Binbrook is fantastic, but not really well used. Well, not a lot of people. So we think we can increase the attendance over there, and I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Thank you.
Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add my voice to congratulations and thank you to our staff as well as Treetop Trekking. Gentlemen, I think we started this discussion, notes here, in 2015. I remember a number of us went to the tour. I think it was the Heart Lake. Treetop Trekking out there, and we zip-lined over an inland lake. Forget the description of it, but it was pretty unique and fit well into the Conservation Authority's mandate for getting people into the wild, into the natural environment, and that fits very much our mandate at Binbrook. We had thoughts of it here at Balls Falls, and that took us, I know you invested a fair bit of time looking at that option, and so I'm pleased to see that we're very close to landing this option for Binbrook in this year. So congratulations and thank you for your patience. I am confident this will increase the public participation in Binbrook. Will increase our revenues just in the gate beyond the percentages and the rent that is outlined here. So thank you, and thank you to staff. Former CAO D'Angelo initiated this when we saw this like 5 years ago, I think. So congratulations thank you for your patience, staff for working out a very, I think, very effective lease. And I think this will be effective to hit the targets, as Tony suggested, in making our conservation areas more self-sustainable and certainly increase the number of people that come to see them. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Timms, for your comments. Seeing no other questions or comments, the report is on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item, I'm sorry. Mickey, I'm sorry. Apologies. Go ahead.
Aren't we looking at this, we're starting to commercialize our conservation areas. You know, there should be other ways of raising revenue. Conservation areas that originally were for families to go and enjoy nature, connect with nature, picnics, and things like that. But we already got a commercialized thing in Binbrook. And I can't see us going that route because we're already in bad books with the general public, with a lot of statements and unfound things. Now we want to put the zip thing in here, and who wants to go to conservation area to go fishing or enjoying nature, and then you got zoom, 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 and destroying the trees. I'm not in favor of it.
Okay. So if you would like to be recorded as a no on the motion we just took, Mickey, we'll make sure we record that for you. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Moving on, we have Friends of Fort Erie Creeks. So gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I'm going to ask for a mover for the following resolution, that report number 3118 respecting a request from Friends of Fort Erie Creeks be received, and that the request from Friends of Fort Erie Creeks to construct a building at Stevensville Conservation Area be supported in principle, subject to securing all necessary permits and approvals, and that staff be directed to prepare a report to the NPCA Board of Directors once all details have been confirmed for final approval. Can I get a move for that? Moved by Member Diodati, second by Member Beattie. That report is on the floor for question or comments. Gentlemen, if you want to come forward, don't be shy. Just, you can hang out at the podium. That report is on the floor right now. Any members of the board have any questions or comments? Member Quirk.
Sorry, Chair. I am supportive of this in absolutely in principle, and I hope it goes ahead. I'm just trying to get clarification on the map. I'm trying to look it up on Google Maps. What we're doing because my printout is a little bit faded. It looks like it's across. Am I reading this right? We're across the street from where the existing club is, but that's now on our property where the existing club isn't on our property. Is that right? Okay. The existing conservation club is on our property, but oh, okay. So I'm just trying to understand. Are we just moving it from one end to the other? What has been sold then? My apologies.
If I may, yes, the building is going to be located on the north side of the laneway. It's actually going to be designed, as I'm told, to be very much complementary to the design of the existing building, the clubhouse that you're familiar with, and that it's going to have a similar look and feel, so that it actually should look very much in place. And I'm sorry, with respect, we own the conservation authority lands there. So I'm not sure what the question is.
My question is, if I'm looking at this map here, I'm sorry, page 7 on the report, I'm assuming that we have the current Fort Erie Conservation Club in that building. Yes. And so what is the need for the new building? I guess now I'm asking that, because I read this to say that they are disposing of one building and putting a new one on.
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay.
No, both buildings will be in place. They both have different functionalities. This one, Ian, you may want to speak to the actual end uses of the building that you have in mind, but there are two different groups looking with two different functional purposes.
You know what? That answers my question, Ian. I understand completely. I've just found where 1465 Thompson Road is, and I thought that was, I understand completely now. So my question's been answered. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian. We're going to let you off the hook. But I would like to congratulate your organization, certainly, for your success in the Trillium Funding Grant. And moving forward, we're excited for you and certainly excited for that property. Any other questions or comments? Member Maloney?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps along the line of Councillor Quirk's questioning, why does this organization require this property to perform their administrative responsibilities? Why could they not be downtown Port Erie in a building to either to be leased or rented or purchased? Why are they encroaching on Conservation Authority lands? Is it really necessary that they be there? And could they not have some arrangement with the Fort Erie Conservation Club to utilize their space when required? How often do they meet? What would they do with this building?
Well, and perhaps maybe Ian could elaborate and answer your question, Member Maloney.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think you were asking what the purpose is of this building going to be. We have three things. One is we've got to construct a new office and a room in which we can train students. That's very important. And secondly, we want to build a lab. We had a lab in our previous building in Thompson Road in Fort Erie. And the lab work is getting more and more important. We're getting more and more demand for water quality testing and to some extent, soil analysis, that sort of thing. And then the third purpose of the building is to store all our outside equipment. We've got quite a bit of stuff, and at the moment we haven't got anywhere to put it. If I could just give a little bit of background. We had a building in Thompson Road in Fort Erie for many years, and this was fine, but we ran into financial problems, and the problems are these. Because we're a voluntary organization, we depend for our funding on on grants from the OLG, from the charity bingos, and secondly, from grants from various organizations like Trillium or whoever it might be, the bank sometimes. And in both of these sources of income, there is no money for maintenance of a building, none. And we got to the stage in the middle of last year when we were badly in, we had money on both of these, but we were badly in debt. And we decided that what we would have to do was to sell the building and look for somewhere where we could operate much more cheaply. Now, the Fordery Conservation Club was an obvious place to ask, to request, and because after all, what the Conservation Club does and what we do, and also there's a third one, and that's the Burt Miller Nature Club, and all of these three, more or less, they have different roles, but they act in concert. So we went to the Fordery Conservation Club and asked if it would be possible for them to accommodate us, and so they agreed. We got an agreement immediately. And so then we looked to see what accommodation there would be, and there really isn't any accommodation in the existing building that we could utilize. And so we went to our the secretary of the OLG in Fordery, that's Grace Gress, and she has been holding the funds that we got from selling our building in Thompson Road. And she said, well, you can design and develop a new building, but you must get approval from the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority first. And that's why we're here today. I would like to add that we are actually working with the NPCA in one very major 3-year project that we've got on, which is to remove dead ash tree. You know, the emerald ash borer, which is knocking hell out of all the ash trees everywhere. We got a grant from the Trillium organization to work with you, with your forestry, with the NPCA forestry people, to remove the dead ash trees along Black Creek, which is actually within the Fordery Conservation Area anyway, and to replace the dead ash trees with other species, but a mixture, that is to say, of other species. So this project has just started, and it's going to go for 3 years. And so within that project, there's going to be a lot of opportunity, and that's written into it, for student training in environmental work. That is to say, in water and in soil and in vegetative conservation. So that really is the basis of our request today. We've been told by the OLG secretary in Fordery that if the Conservation Authority agrees, she can release us some money more or less right away so that we can make a proper design for a new building to add to what is already there. I would like to say one more thing. We have to look to the future. We're in 2018, and I hope if we get this building, if you approve, it will be up for 20 or 30 years, maybe more. So we want to incorporate things, certainly solar panels on the roof, or a solar roof if we can afford it. And also we've been thinking about geothermal heat instead of gas heat. Once again, it all depends on if we can afford it. But before we can do that, we really need to get your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Maloney?
Is there a possibility of other uses for this building other than the Friends of the Fordery Creeks? Are there members or groups in the community that could also utilize this facility? And we're talking about laboratories and people doing studies of this nature. Are these all volunteers who would operate these facilities? Are people with background in this type of study, that, or are they just friendly volunteers?
So probably Ian can answer that question, but I thought his answer was very succinct earlier, that Friends of 48 Creeks, Burt Miller Nature Club, and the Stevensville Conservation Authority have had discussions as far as providing utility for this new building. But to your question about who has the expertise and the skill set to conduct the field tests and the water quality analysis, I'll leave that up to Ian. Ian, the question is, are these basically volunteers or are there accredited individuals that actually would be using these laboratory facilities?
All of those. I am actually a qualified chemist, so I can design and run a lab to do this kind of work without any difficulty. But in addition to that, we try to employ, if we can, people who've been trained in Niagara College in GIS and in environmental work, and we also get volunteers in every summer from the summer works program of the government. On the whole, we cooperate quite a lot with Niagara College. We even have a situation where one of the things that we do, we come up with a small research project for Niagara College students to do every year, and they do it, and we more or less supervise them with the Niagara College's approval, of course. And some of the results of the work that they have come up with have been actually very impressive, and a considerable addition to our knowledge of the landscape, the waterscape, the landscape of this whole area.
Member Maloney, you still have the floor.
I'm happy with the responses given, and I'll be happy to support this report.
Okay, thank you, Member Maloney. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's passed. Thank you, Ian. And,
thank you very much. That is a very big step forward for us.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thank you. Okay, at this time, I would ask the board's indulgence to get back to the original agenda. Business for information. 5.1, designation of the Niagara River as a Ramsar site, report number 32-18. Natalie, is Natalie here? Hi, Natalie, how are you? Come forward. I'm going to put the resolution on the floor, and then if members have any question or comments to the resolution, and certainly Natalie is here to answer. So, that report 3218 respecting designation of the Niagara River as a Ramsar site be received for information, moved by Member Kasperset, seconded by Member Joyner. Go ahead, Natalie. I'll open up to questions of the board with respect to the report. Member Shurton.
Again, I know I'm asking for lots of questions and clarification, but maybe somebody can indulge me here, but my understanding was we were seeking maybe to not be involved in this. Do we get some more clarification that we can be involved in this? But I thought we asked to be released from this. So if someone could just confirm that, that would be great.
So I'm going to let Natalie hopefully maybe just provide a little bit more detail. But from my perspective, this process began, I believe, back in 2015 when this board endorsed the potential of a Ramsar designation along the Niagara River corridor. Since that time, this board hasn't had too much correspondence or any information with respect to that process moving forward. As you recall, Member Shurton, there was a notice for reconsideration until this board could be properly informed as far as what has transpired since we first endorsed it, get this board some more information in order to make a more informed decision. That's what's led us to this point right here. I thank Natalie for coming forward and hopefully shedding some light on that process and where we're at right now in order for this board to make an informed decision moving forward. So having said that, Natalie?
Sure. So in your board package, you have a report for information that provides all the information and context in the history. So I can just briefly provide some overview on that report. So as Chairman Annunziata mentioned, This board did endorse the pursuit of a Ramsar designation in 2015, and that is attached as an appendix. The Convention on Ramsar is very specific in saying that this is not a regulatory designation. I believe that that may have been the concern of the board and as well as some other municipalities in the area. It is a voluntary program of good faith to designate the Niagara River from shore to shore on both sides of the border, and from Fort Erie to Lake Ontario, so the waters of the Niagara River, as well as some already protected areas along the shorelines. The Niagara River is very unique and very important, and to have a Ramsar designation would be just a really wonderful celebration for the Niagara River as I represent the Remedial Action Plan initiative, as we move to change the status of the Niagara River from an area of concern to a title of a vibrant ecosystem that can support fish and wildlife and provide beneficial uses to humans like recreational activities, tourism. The Niagara River is so important that it actually meets all of the 9 criteria that are required by Ramsar designation to have that title. You only need 1 of those criteria to meet the requirements to get Ramsar. We, as the Niagara River, meet all 9, and that's really fantastic and a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate the Niagara River. All along, the Niagara River Remedial Action Plan committees have supported the pursuit of the Ramsar designation. As you have received that information in 2015 when it was presented to you, and we continue to do so. It is in our work plans every year to continue that support, and that is essentially through me providing advice and support and participating in the advisory group. Also in your package for information, there was some information from the Ramsar Steering Committee. They've recently updated their terms of reference, and the NPCA, as well as representation from the Niagara River Remedial Action Plan, being me, would participate in an advisory committee role. And I see that fitting very well in terms of what I do for the Niagara River, and potentially, that's up to you, but potentially a good link for what the NPCA does as well. Are there any other questions? I wasn't prepared for a full overview.
Member Shurton, you still have the floor, so I'm hoping...
No, that's good. I just appreciate the update.
Yep, I'm going to reserve my questions for last, but if there's any other board members that have any questions for Natalie? Oh, one, Mr. CEO?
Natalie, if you could expand on Canada's commitment to Ramsar as the last piece of information. Thank you.
Sure. So Canada signed on to the Ramsar Convention in 1981, and since that time has listed 37 Ramsar sites in Canada, 8 of which are in Ontario. And part of their role is to provide guidance and the wise use of wetlands in Canada. And the government of Canada has supported the Ramsar designation already back in 1981. So.
Thank you for that. Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the recommendation that's before us, and I recall our enthusiasm for the Ramsar designation back at the beginning of this process, because it was an opportunity, as you say, to celebrate the diversity of the Niagara River and that corridor. A couple of issues arrived a little later down the road where there was a concern that the boundaries of the Ramsar designation were of a concern to the agricultural community of Niagara-on-the-Lake, where they thought this was going to start impeding, putting another layer of regulation on agricultural lands and any lands along the corridor. And we had been reassured that this designation has no regulations attached to it. It does not have the power of a bylaw or a planning regulation, but what we found, the experience around other Ramsar areas is that this designation has been used as an argument in planning arguments and planning procedures that has put kind of a moral pressure, moral suasion on what the zoning decide or near Ramsar, And that is really the experience that's been concerning to, I think, the agricultural community of Niagara-on-the-Lake. And I'm not sure what it does to the Parks Commission, but it does add a whole lot, another layer of concern and pressure to make no changes. So that arrived a little bit late in the process, and I think has produced a bit of a stepping back and having another look at this experience. And for that reason, the number of bodies have expressed a concern about continuing with this, full-blown endorsement. The recommendation here, I think, allows the Conservation Authority the opportunity to participate more and be a little more clear about what's involved. And because I think always the question about where the boundaries were, so that we could say to the farmer, no, you're not going to be, if there is no regulation, and clearly you're not going to be dealing with another layer of pressure on what you can or cannot do with your land. So I think this is a good step forward in terms of being more involved with the discussions and more fully informed. Because at some point, I hope that we can fully endorse the Ramsar designation, but we need to know clearly what the ramifications are on the property owners along that corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Timms. So seeing no other questions, I have some questions. Specifically, while I'm grateful to see the terms of reference come forward, my only question is, what's taken so long? The original motion that this board passed in good faith was to actually be involved in that process. So despite emails from the chair's office in order to inform this board what's going on with the process, we've never had any information come our way in order to keep this board informed in the decision-making process. So that's been disappointing. And maybe you can pass that on to the Ramsar committee, that we've received no correspondence and no involvement despite a board resolution requesting that involvement. It's unfortunate that Member Dart isn't here. He represents one of those communities that Ramsar is seeking cooperation with. And to date, I know that the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake has not endorsed this process. Having said that, I don't know if you can answer my question, Natalie, but why hasn't this board been kept in the loop and apprised moving forward up to this point?
I can't answer that question. As far as I understand, the committee is still active, and I do believe that the person that was contacted for information may have been the U.S. co-chair, and that may have been why there are some issues. Ramsar Steering Committee has representation from the Canadian parties as well as the American, and we are seeking a transboundary designation, and both sides of the border do work independently and are seeking separate designations. But as far as updates in process, I cannot provide information from that, as I have not been involved in the steering committee. I am provided as an advisory role, and my advice has not been sought out right now.
Okay, well, I appreciate those comments. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but certainly that's been a concern of mine. And making informed decisions is a priority with this board. And when you don't have the information in order to make those informed decisions, it's unfortunate. Member Diodati, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just in regard to your question and the answer, so this is the part that I find a little bit concerning. The letter dated March 20th that came from Ramsar, in the second paragraph they said, despite the volunteer committee having answered all reasonable questions. So that isn't necessarily what's happened. We've been left without answers, and so I don't know if we need to address the fact that that's not factual.
So for the to Member Diodati's question and concern, under correspondence, there is a letter that came forward asking the requesting that the NPCA withdraw their support. So to that particular passage in that letter, Member Diodati, I concur 100%. That isn't the case. We've sent correspondence to both the American co-chair and to the Canadian co-chair, and the American co-chair has forwarded our questions and comments to the Canadian co-chair. We haven't heard anything back. So it's unfortunate that it's come to this, but that's why it's before this board. in order that we get the questions that we have answered in order to make an informed decision. So I'm going to hold the questions until that report comes forward, which is a little bit further in the agenda. And there's some actionable items that are going to be attached to the proposed Niagara River Ramsar designation, and I'll entertain motions from the board at that particular time. So having said that, Natalie, thank you for answering the questions the best that you can. You do incredible work with RAP, and keep up the great work. And just maybe we had a question earlier, and Member DeFruscio brought it forward with respect to the black water. And again, you know, sometimes things are outside our jurisdiction, outside our control. So if you just want to maybe comment a little bit more, I understand that there is an announcement coming from the American side with respect to Ramsar. I find it incredibly hypocritical that they can't seem to find a solution to their release of the black water that's causing an incredible heightened amount of concern with our Canadian residents, and yet they would even look to endorse and adopt Ramsar. So can you just follow up on the black water situation that's coming from our American neighbors?
Sure. Would you like me to address that now?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so as far as I understand, the black water that you're referring to is a discharge that was released in July of 2017 and was actually an issue with human error to the extent of they were doing some technical processes to their water treatment plant on the U.S. side. It is outside of our jurisdiction. I've not been involved in the process. That's the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as I believe the U.S. EPA. From what I have heard, they are trying to address those issues, and the last that I heard in the news was that the plant and the Water Quality Board on the U.S. side will be receiving some funding to do some upgrades and hopefully address those issues with whether it be the treatment process or whether it be the infrastructure on the U.S. side. That's as far as I know, though.
Okay. So Member DeFruscio did make a comment, and again, I don't want to put innuendo or rumor out there, but he said that they are discharging at 2 a.m. There's fishermen out there that see it on a regular basis. I don't know if you can just comment on that, but again, I don't want to, put misinformation out there. So if you can comment on Member DeFruscio's comment that they're still doing it at 2 a.m. Under the cover of darkness.
I am not sure when they do discharges. I'm not aware of when the U.S. side has sewer discharges. I can look into that information for you if you would like and try to contact my U.S. counterparts. It's very standard practice for water treatment plants to do discharges. Usually treated water goes back into the river system. It's not uncommon. It's part of regulations is to have water cleaned to a certain level and then release that water back into the system where it was taken from. As far as the U.S. side, I cannot comment on the regulations or when they do discharges.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that comment. So thank you, Natalie. And seeing no other questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor of receiving this for information? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Okay, 5.2 on the agenda, Financial and Reserve Report, month ending February 2018, report number 33-18. The report number 3318, respecting Financial and Reserve Report, month ending February 2018, be received for information. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member McPherson. Questions or comments to that report? Member Shurton.
Just for question, I noticed on there, and it may not apply, but I noticed that on the levy part, there's reference to Niagara and to Hamilton, but nothing of Haldeman. Is that just because of the what was going on with them appealing, or why isn't there no mention of the Haldeman levy on that report?
Mr. Barrick.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Haldeman would be captured under municipal levy general. All three are there as the general levy. The only reason Niagara and Hamilton are separated later is because there's a special levy applied for Niagara and a special levy applied for Hamilton, but no special levy applied for Haldeman.
Thanks for that, David.
Thank you for that, Mr. Barrick. Member Shurton, good. Okay. Any other question or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that report is carried. Thank you. Next item agenda, NPCA Awareness Survey Secondary Study, report number 3818. That report 3818 respecting NPCA Awareness Survey Secondary Study be received for information. Questions or comments? Member Beatty.
I'd like a copy of it. It wasn't in my pack.
We'll make sure you get a copy. And again, just some background. As you recall, this board received some survey statistics last board meeting. It was the will of this board to break out some of those numbers a little bit more. We did conduct that survey. We did get the response rate that we needed in order to qualify those numbers, and that's why it's coming before you this afternoon. Member Jeffs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wasn't at the last meeting, and then I see in the minutes that are coming up that it was requested to do a second survey. So did that direction come from that committee, or you're saying that direction came from the board at the last meeting?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay. So I'll need a mover for that that report. Moved by Member Beatty, seconded by Member Timms. All those in favor? And that's approved. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, business for consideration, standing committee reports. At this time, I'm going to call upon Mr. Todd McDonald for the following presentation. 6.1.1.1 NPCA 2018 to 2021 strategic plan, where he's going to introduce a primer and strategic themes, mandate and mission statements, and have your say strategic plan consultation. Mr. McDonald, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my purpose here today is to brief the board on a preparatory package that has been put together for public consultation as part of the strategic planning process. This is consistent with the process that the board endorsed with Member Quirk's previous report. There are basically 3 packages of information that I'll run the board through quickly, and happy to take questions as we move through the materials. The first of these is a quick primer that we'd like to use when we go out to do public consultations on the board's strategic planning process. We want to be able to explain to the public that some preparatory work has been done via the 2-day strategic plan working session that was attended by a significant number of board members. We want to make it clear that coming out of that session, specifically the strategic priority themes that will underpin the strategic plan, that those themes have also been reviewed after the 2-day session by the subcommittee, the strategic planning subcommittee, and then today, if all should go well, that the board deems it appropriate for that package to move forward into the public consultations. In other words, we're sort of at the, when we go out to deal with these matters in the public consultation process, we'll be able to indicate the 2 major process steps that we've executed already and those to come, i.e. at the far end of public consultation, we will be able to flesh out the themes with more specific content around actions and the relative priority of those themes. We'll be able to proceed to draft a strategic plan document, and with the legitimacy that has been built through the public consultation process, bring that process back to the board for June. In this sort of primer, we also want to explain some of the philosophy that's going to govern strategic planning. The key here is that we don't want to overextend ourselves. Good strategy is much about what an organization does not do, it's about what it does. We know from a wide-ranging experience of public strategic planning exercises that plans that attempt to be too much to too many people at any particular point in time are ineffective. We also know that strategic change, which is really what a strategic plan is about, is limited by our capacity to change. Typically, research shows that 80% of the capacity of any organization to do anything is taken up by the whirlwind of the day job. In other words, the regular delivery of services and the operation of the NPCA will not cease and desist while we're trying to execute strategic change. We have limited capacity for change, and therefore we have to make sure that our priorities for change, i.e. the strategic themes, are properly triaged and we can act on them in a logical sequence over time. So we want to convey that message clearly to the public that change will take time and that we want to focus first on the most important elements of change, which they will hopefully identify for us in the public consultations. And then finally, we need to make this point that the number of priorities at any given point in time that the board wants to work on as quote-unquote new items or new priorities, we stand the greatest probability of succeeding and properly executing those priorities when we build bundles of priorities, say 2 to 3 priorities at a time. We focus on those. As we achieve them, we move on to the next bundle of priorities so that we take measured steps moving forward and we avoid the pitfall of many strategic planning exercises. We avoid being a mile wide and an inch thick. So with that primer in mind, the strategic priority themes that came out of the 2-day session and have subsequently been reviewed, refined, and then blessed by the Strategic Planning Committee are as follows. The first of those themes, sharpening the mandate and mission, is a theme that reflects the fact that we want to ensure, the direction from the committee is we want to ensure that the clear understanding of our mandate is defined by the Conservation Act as the backbone of our mandate, and we want to make sure that that lens, recognizing that we have clearly defined statutory, regulatory responsibilities, goes on to shape our approach to the other strategic priority themes. Again, avoiding the potential pitfall of overreach. The second priority theme is focused on watershed resource management planning, one of the core elements of our business. Making sure that we can build appropriate coalitions on specific water courses, with the NPCA coordinating many of these coalition-based approaches to watershed planning. That we welcome an engineering-based perspective and actions on climate change mitigation that is in fact consistent with our core mandate, that we focus on improved and comprehensive floodplain mapping to inform decisions around development permitting and climate change mitigation, that we have an evidence-based approach to mitigating environmental degradation, that we support aquatic habitats, that we monitor water quality while recognizing that we are perhaps not in the primary driver's seat role in terms of impacting water quality. That may be an MOE role. And we focus on our already well-defined source water protection responsibilities. It's priority theme B. Priority theme C is rebuilding the canopy. This is the initiative of planting 1 million trees and 3 million plants. The commitment coming out of the working session was that the NPCA would come to this table in a quarterbacking role, but also bringing capital dollars to the table to build that coalition of a watershed-wide trees co-op, that we would achieve watershed restoration impacts beyond our previously more narrow restoration programming, that again, through this work, we would have a role in mitigating climate change impact and strengthening our efforts around pushback around invasive species, and that the Rebuild the Canopy initiative would be driven by evidence-based business planning. We would build a business plan at the beginning of this initiative with our co-op partners, with our community coalition. The business plan would probably run through 2 cycles of this board and the watershed councils, and we would have performance targets around trees planted and perhaps survivable trees at sort of year 4, at the midpoint of this 8-year initiative, and at the end of year 8. Priority D, this was around the 100-year land plan, forging corridors and creating parks. aspirational goals around creating a network of 3 to 4 central parks, if I can use that term colloquially, connecting across the watershed, creating wildlife migration corridors, and doing habitat protection, restoration, and enhancement. We would continue with our ongoing strategic land acquisition at NPCA using our already well-developed NPCA criteria. The previous review of the 2014-2017 plan showed that we've been successful in both making investments and avoiding suboptimal investments with those criteria. We would consider end-of-life plans for quarries when we go out to speak to the public. We would throw out the idea of master plans for each of these acquired major land parcels. There's some examples of some lands that would seem to fit into these into the 100-year land plan. We would be driving partnerships around data mining, volunteers, GIS mapping, and of course we would have some linkages that would connect with Rebuild the Canopy. There is the opportunity to use land to build some of these, to grow some of these trees. Priority theme E. We've colloquially called this one addressing the demand curve. This is all about expanding services for parks. We know that we have master plan mandated work improvements that are embedded in the 10-year budget and of course capital budget. Of course we'd want to focus on executing those. There's also this proposal of an expansion of existing capacity. At this point, staff are recommending we sort of test the water with the notion of 100 new camping spaces, 50 at Chippewa, 50 at Long Beach. And again, we would be positioning this as a low-risk capital investment because we know that we have a waiting list that documents excess demand in the system. And so under this initiative, we would be addressing that demand. We believe staff believe there's strong opportunities for new revenue streams to self-fund over a period of time these park improvements and expansions. And going forward, we would develop specific timeframes, business plan targets for each phased bundle of new campsites that would come forward as this addressing the demand curve initiative. And of course, implicit in all of this is maintaining our life cycle driven maintenance of our existing parks, facilities, and campsites. We've come a long way through the previous strategic plan in moving towards sustainability, and the board members that participated were pretty clear we don't want to be robbing Peter to pay Paul, so the expansion and the maintenance stuff has to go hand in hand. The continuous improvement theme here, priority theme F, is building on all of the good work that we documented in the previous evaluation of that strategic plan, the good management progress that characterized the progress under that plan. So obviously here would be acting on the recommendations from the third-party work done by the Auditor General as well as the third-party work done by my firm on unfinished business with the management improvement capabilities. Building an NPCA performance scorecard will be critical. Developing a portfolio of key performance indicators that will yield future performance targets so that we can continue to improve our accountability and our results-based achievements for the watershed. The notion of HQ, headquarters leasing improvements to support improved customer service and improve staff's working conditions was raised as an item for public feedback. We also wanted to highlight the procurement model improvements that are already underway to centralize and ensure consistency and accountability around procurement. We want to highlight the continuing steady continuous improvements efforts around HR management tools and processes, modernizing those with our dedicated resources that we have in place. The notion of website reinvention was raised as an issue to secure feedback on, and the whole question of fiscal management around using borrowing capacity opportunities to leverage improved capital investment and reducing the unfunded capital deficit for our existing properties. And finally on to priority theme G, doing consultation a new way, modernizing the toolkit. We know that we have an opportunity to expand on the conventional approach to expand the conversation beyond traditional face-to-face using interactive software and online tools. We can create an ongoing community engagement dialogue, and we can build sustained relationships with our partners and stakeholders. We know that we have an opportunity to improve the documentation of community members who want to be part of the conversation, and tools are in place and actively being used to do that. And we can create two-way communication channels using the advisory committee, where the advisory committee both disseminates information back to stakeholder groupings, as well as gathers and integrates input from those same groupings. So they play a sort of pivotal point as a lens for us to have those conversations. The overall objective here to ensure that all voices are heard via technologies that control for the sometimes excessive volume of some in public sessions and democratize the input from all of the actors across the conversation. So those are the priority themes and the primer that we would like to introduce, and we're happy to take questions, reflect comments from the board. In terms of the decision point, we are looking for your blessing to take those out and inform the public conversation that we will be having over the next number of weeks on this matter. The messaging that you'll hear around communications is our sort of approach to take this content and then execute it in an appropriate tactical fashion, and you'll be hearing more about that momentarily.
Thanks, Todd, for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the report on the floor right now as well. While Mr. McDonald is here, if board members have any questions or comments to the report and to the presentation that Mr. McDonald just showed the board, you can ask it then. So I'm going to need a mover for the following resolution: that the primer and strategic themes, mandate and mission statements, and have your say strategic plan consultation be endorsed as presented. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Quirk, second by Member Kaspersets. That is on the floor for question or comments. I'll go around the table this way. Member Beatty.
Thank you. I commend all the members who have been involved in the development of this process so far to date. I have to speak negatively concerning one aspect of it, and I would refer you to page 7 or slide 7. In broad strokes, I accept the concept that the broader you are, the less depth you're going to be able to succeed. But if I look at the last 4 years, we had, in my opinion, one of the broadest 5 areas of potential change, and we have done that in depth successfully to about a 98-99% completion. To put numbers on page 7 that you have negates what follows, because you say don't have a large number of objectives, but yet you then go on to list 6 or 7 of them. So I think that the page, that particular page, at least with the numerics that are there, while in broad strokes is instrumental, is informative, it negates what follows. And I think that that will, to some degree, influence people who are readers and responders to the initiatives. And I've made this suggestion before, and I haven't got the specifics now that we're this far along. I think I need to apply some analysis to this. I see the number of objectives or strategies we have as being not equal in terms of breadth or depth. And I see to some extent there are some things that are directions of what we're going to be doing that needs to be clearly understood by the public at large and responded to. But to some extent, a lot of it's how. And the hows to me are not quite as substantive as the whats from the public perception. So maybe we need to do something to streamline the 7 issues that are there into a fewer number by categorizing them. So this is what we're about to do, and here are the things we're going to be doing to help us get there. So those are my comments in terms of stuff, and I don't mean to be as negative as it's sounding, but it is a case where I think we do need to refine what we're saying at the beginning versus what we say at the end to be more coordinated. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd, I don't know if you have any comments or you want to redress?
Sure, I have a couple of comments. If the primer is doing, if the board decides the primer is doing an inadequate job of making the following point, I take that to heart and we can make some changes to it. The intent of the information in question is to say, dear public, if you decide that these 7 priority themes are legitimate, that's great. We'd also like your feedback in terms of which ones are most important to you and which ones you would like us to work on first. If we pick 3 that we want to push full speed ahead on first, and then after we've successfully achieved the goals for those 3, here is the next bundle of 3 that we would work on next. The question of whether we could work on 6 priority fronts at one point in time, there's a risk that we would in fact end up a mile wide and an inch thick. And I would refer to the 2014-2017 assessment we did, where we did show that while progress overall was commendable, there was an unevenness to the progress that we had made under the previous strategic plan, that we had moved, that we had relatively greater progress in some areas than others, although progress overall across the piece. So it's simply an attempt to message the public that we want to know about your wildly important priorities, and we want to give them a relatively heavier emphasis in the plan. To the member's second point, which I do agree with, there are some of those strategic priorities that talk about how we do business, and I agree with him that the immediacy of the public interest in those might be less than they will be around something like the canopy plan or the watershed climate change mitigation stuff. So we can certainly tailor our communication efforts and our consultation efforts to reflect that reality.
Thank you for those answers, and I think, to be quite honest, in a concise form, your reaction to that should be incorporated into this document as it goes to the public. That we can tackle a number of issues, but we may have to do sequentially. Right. We may have to prioritize some as being more important than others in terms of that process. That cushions the impact of what I now see as a black and white issue. Keep it low, otherwise you're going to fail. But keeping it at the number that it is, but strategically implementing them or attacking them, may be the route to go.
Yeah, bite-sized pieces rather than compression of the whole package is the message there. But if it's been clumsily executed, I'm happy to go, on my part, let me be clear.
I'm happy clumsily to go. At all, you basically were described for the voices that you heard. Mine was one of them.
Thank you, Member Beatty. Moving along the table, Member Beatty.
I'm going to ask Tony, because the last meeting we were at, I came away with the understanding that this slide was going to be deleted, page 7. It was my understanding that it was causing confusion and that the committee had reached a consensus that slide 7 should not be in the final document. Were you at the same meeting?
Through the chair, Member Quirk.
Thank you. Through the chair, Stu, I do recall that conversation with respect to staff direction to try to tighten up the slide specifically to address Member Beatty's concerns as well at that time. So that discussion was had. I don't know if the decision was, I thought the direction we had given Todd was to tighten this up, not necessarily remove it, but to clarify so that exactly what Member Beatty had mentioned was not an issue on the go forward when we go out to the public for the presentation. So I will also say that we're going to get these circulated ahead of time. So Todd, I'm going to completely throw Todd under the bus on this one and just say if we can tighten up this slide before it goes to the public as your direction to that very issue to deal with Member Beatty's concerns, because we did have that conversation.
Through the chair to Member Quirk, Councillor Beatty's comments are instructive to me that my attempt was to convey on the slide what I said and what the member thought was appropriate, and obviously that hasn't been done yet. So we will definitely take another crack at that and make that crystal clear.
Thank you, Todd. Member Beatty, you still have the floor.
I don't think we should be taking another crack at this. I think the committee consensus was to remove it. And I would suggest, if not make a motion, that we remove it. It's confusing. It's going to cause needless concern. I think the committee's position on it is correct and accurate, that this slide should be removed.
Okay, so I will be taking amendments to this report. The first one has come forward by Member Beatty. I'm going to deal with them at the end of question and comments. So Member Beatty, I'll come back to you to make that amendment at the appropriate time. Any other questions or comments? Member Joyner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is just a question of wordsmithing, and it's on page 15, and it's the very last sentence. Ensure all voices are heard via technologies that control for excessive volume and democratize input from all actors. Could you please remove the word actors? People who engage in conversation are not actors. Can we just change that word?
We'll take that as a friendly direction of the board, and I'm sure Mr. McDonald has no problem with that.
Yeah,
So
I
thank
do
you for
not,
bringing
and
that
I'll
forward.
take that as direction, and we'll execute that change immediately.
Thank you, Todd. Yep, thanks, Doug, for bringing that forward. Yep, Member Kasperseth?
Through the chair, back on your sheet theme E, addressing the demand curve, did we not discuss doing some kind of camping at the Bimber Conservation Park? Exploring some glamping issues in the other areas where we could bring overnight camping?
So that's a specific issue you're asking, and I'm wondering if that particular issue would be captured in a more general item in this. So maybe Member Quirk has his hand up, so maybe Member Quirk, if you have an answer for that.
Through you, Chair, to Member Kasperseth, if you look at the two items, expand number of campsites in existing NPCA park facilities, I saw that as a separate item for the glamping, which was captured under the next item, which says opportunity for revenue streams for self-funded at NPCA park improvements. I saw that as more of a further discussion and sharing with the public sort of the master plans for Bimbrook and the other issues that are going through. So while the glamping aspect wasn't specifically addressed in the two issues, the second bullet point was more about the quick wins for capital improvements, whereas the glamping would have been not necessarily required as direct capital improvements, but working within the existing plan. So that maybe if they were separated a little bit, they wouldn't be commingled in the public's mind.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other question or comments? Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the discussion of Member Beatty and Beatty, the slide number 7, I think, needs to have that little bit of additional point to be made about we need to choose priorities, and that's part of the consultation process. So the point here about having too many, because you go out consultation, there'll be members of the public with additional things we should do. So I think it's valuable in making that point when you're doing the presentation, because that's the context we're talking about. These are the slides that we're going to present to the public. So by adding another point to this slide is that this is the risk if you get 13. We've got 6, and consultants' advice is the fewer you have, the more effective you have. So I think that would be helpful to add to it and choose the priorities.
So on that point, I do have an amendment coming forward from Member Beatty that it's fundamentally different from what you're asking, because the recommendation coming forward from Member Beatty is to remove it entirely. I will instruct you in the event that that amendment fails, then by all means, Member Timms, you can put something else on the floor to add or delete, but keeping page 7 intact.
All right.
So
I'll go on to other points I wanted to raise. Thank you for, I think, responding to what we had discussed in terms of making the theme B, focused on watershed resource management. Thank you, because I made the point that was a fundamental and primary focus for any conservation authority, is watershed management in terms of floods. And so this is, appreciate your response to that. My other point was on theme D, forging corridors and creating parks. I just don't recall the reference to Showers Watercourse. There's a line here that says Seaway Surplus Lands, Department of National Defense Lands, and then Showers Watercourse. I don't recall what that was referred to. Member Beatty seems to remember. Mr. Chair?
Yep. Yes?
I brought that up. It's with regard to the Seaway properties, and it's basically the area of the Lost Canal, in which there are still existing locks. It goes up beside the General Motors plant on Glendale, and it goes basically to the far side of locks. What would it be? 7654, I think.
Okay, well, maybe just the addition, calling it Seaway Showers water
That would be
course.
fine,
I think
yes.
everybody would pick that up.
Would you like to add that language, Member Timms, or is that
Sure.
just understood?
No, I think it's important because some will understand it, everybody will understand it when you say Seaway Showers.
Okay, so I'm going to put it to the board if that's a friendly language addition. There's no need to make a formal amendment on that one, so passing that on to Mr. McDonald as far as inclusion goes. Member Timms, you good? Nope.
The last item was on theme G, doing consultation a new way. The intention is that doing public consultation a new way. That's not necessarily, I'm just thinking that might be more helpful. Consultation, we consult with developers, and that's what everybody seems to be focused on half the time. So is this intention is about the public consultation, not the consultation we do with various applications? Mr. Chairman, would that be possible to add doing public consultation a new way? Consider it friendly, just like the last one?
That would be considered friendly as well, but by nature of what consultation is, by nature of who our stakeholders are, they're all public agents within that process, so I have no problem adding that language as a friendly amendment as well. I'll put it to the board if that's acceptable, friendly. Yeah? Okay, Mr. McDonald, got that as well. Member Timms, are you good? Thank you. Okay, Member McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a question on the mission vision. And I don't see vision anymore. I see mandate, and I wonder if that is just me not seeing the vision statement, or if that's what is now going to be our vision is the mandate. Through you, Mr. Chair, to maybe Mr. McDonald.
So, and I want to build on that question because I think it's a very important distinction that Member McPherson raises. So maybe I'll put it to you, Mr. McDonald, and we'll just kind of rephrase it, and hopefully you can get an answer from Member McPherson and myself as well. So when we talk about mandate, I don't really see this board or the public influencing mandate, understanding that it's provincial language. It's a natural extension of provincial legislation that we respect, and we call that our mandate. So in order to, I don't see an opportunity to influence that whatsoever. So maybe you can just speak to that, and I mean, it would be my recommendation to completely remove the word mandate, because I really don't know how mandate would be up for public discussion. But maybe you want to expand on that.
A couple of thoughts that might be useful here. Certainly, mandate is an objective reality. It is a fait accompli. It is set out in legislation, and it is prescriptive. That being said, the first strategic priority theme in the package says we want to make sure that our mission is closely aligned with our mandate. Okay. So providing the mandate information to the public is relevant for them to then consider our mission, and for them to also importantly consider not just what our mandate consists of, but what it does not consist of. In the last strategic planning exercise, I think it would be fair to say at the beginning there was widespread confusion about who does what. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure that we have crystal clarity going forward by saying, this is our mandate. We're committed to impartially fulfilling our mandate in an unbiased and technically appropriate fashion. And by the way, the following issues that you might be interested in are not necessarily consistent with our mandate. We may play a supporting role, we may play no role whatsoever in those issues. So that kind of clarity I think will be important going forward. Mm-hmm. And it leads to the logical conclusion then that our mission is to execute our mandate in ways that are consistent with our culture as an organization and the management performance of our organization. So I think that's what the current package does, is it links mission very clearly to mandate, establishes clear boundaries around it, and that might be a helpful clarification going forward if the public now understands, oh, so you're not the champion of water quality, although you play a supporting role in monitoring and measuring it, that properly falls to the MOE. And that kind of clarity, I think, will be helpful as we go forward and get public input into what our priorities should be.
Okay. Member McPherson, you still have the
Through
floor.
you, Mr. Chair, and I think what's missing for me, though, is the vision piece is where are you going to be at the end of this 4-year period, and how are you going to measure that? And it's more of a, the mission is the work to get there, and the vision for me is, what is the picture at the end of the road?
I wholeheartedly agree. Vision statements are typically about the desired end state or end result that we're hoping to achieve. Mission statements are an explanation of our reason for being, our raison d'etre. In other words, what is our fundamental job to be. And currently, the package that the Strategic Planning Subcommittee has brought forward, there was a consideration there that their preference was to bring forward a mandate statement along with a mission statement, and there was a strategic consideration that would be the most useful piece to bring forward in the discussion. That's just the history that brings us to today.
Member McPherson? Okay. So just, yep, Member Court, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'd like to again thank all the members of the committee, all the members of the board for the work they did at the working session, all the members of the committee to get us to this stage working with Todd. I'd just like to comment on a couple things. I did feel that this slide was reworked to explain, if you read it from start to finish, to explain that the strategic priorities would be bundled and triaged, and that we didn't lose out from the fact that saying we can't not do them, we just have to prioritize them. And I think that's what the wording on this slide, if you read it from start to finish, says. It might have to be better clarified, or maybe take the numbers out of it, or maybe even just take the chart out of it and just explain why we're going to prioritize and why we're going to the public for the consultation. That might be the compromise solution to the direction from the committee. Further to Member McPherson's comments about the value and vision statements, the feeling from the Strategic Planning Committee meeting that we had the following week was that the vision and value, if we're going out for true public consultation to say if we've hit it right on the nail on the head correctly with the strategic themes, that the vision and values would flow from where the priorities came from the public consultation aspect of it. So if we go out to the public and say, here's our mandate and here's our mission, here's the themes that we want to fit into the strategic plan. We're asking the public and the stakeholders how you feel about the priorities of those themes, whether those themes are accurate, whether those themes make sense to you. The how and the why still comes out of the tactical implementation of the strategic plan, but the goals around those themes, if at the end of the public consultation we get check marks on certain one of them and very loud X's and O's on the other ones, we have to keep in mind that, again, the strategic plan is a board-driven process and board-driven document. So we want to make sure that after we hear back from that consultation process through the tools that we have, what the vision and values that flow out of those themes come from. Because if we go with a vision that sort of prejudges the outcome of that consultation, the decision was maybe that the people that we're asking to comment on may not feel that we're actually listening to them. So it was a compromise that came from the committee to say mission and mandate are clearly documented within legislation. Vision and values will evolve out of what we hear from the stakeholder consultation with respect to the themes that we've come up with. And the general consensus from the committee at the second meeting was that was acceptable to keep the consultation process and move the consultation process forward. But it doesn't take away from the vision and values that will come out of that.
Okay, so thank you for that. Seeing no other questions, I'm just going to have a few questions of my own and comments. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate all of these individual reports. So the first one, and I'm assuming that the board will see that as a friendly separation. The first report I'm going to put on is the NPCA 2018-2021 Strategic Plan. I'm going back to Member Beattie for his proposed amendment. Member Beattie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I take it you are referring to the strategic plan for public community consideration, and that we'll deal with for consideration by the NPCA board document?
Correct.
Later. Okay. Then, I would move that slide 7 be removed from this document.
Do you have a seconder? Second by Member Kaspersets. So that amendment is on the floor for questions or comments. Member Quirk.
Yeah, I'd like to amend the amendment, and hopefully the movers will consider it friendly, that the slide 7 be removed, but a slide explaining the importance of triaging and bundling of priorities be added in its place.
I will look to the mover and the seconder to accept that as a friendly recommendation.
As long as it doesn't cause the confusion that this thing could cause when you go before the public. It's contradicting
This is coming out.
the 7 priorities. You can't have a report that starts off with a contradiction of what you're trying to do. That's the biggest concern that I have with respect to slide 7.
So I'm sensing it's not necessarily a friendly.
In which case, I'd just like to speak to it then very
I'd like to
briefly.
see it. I'd like to see the slide before I remove my concern. And I'm perfectly willing to test the board to see if they're in agreement with me. If they're not in agreement with me, then it's... so I would say we proceed with the vote and let's see where it is.
So if I may speak to it, then if it's not a friendly amendment,
Yep,
my
go ahead.
my speaking to my amendment is that if you take this slide as part of the primer that's going out for public consultation, one of the reasons the slide's there is asking, why are we consulting the public? It's not just on whether we hit the nail on the head with the themes, but what do you want to prioritize? Because when it comes back to implementing the strategic plan, the board wants the stakeholder consultation on how we implement the plan. So this slide speaks to the reason why we're asking the public and the stakeholders to help us prioritize them. So if you were to take a look at this slide and take the words, take everything below the headline, the NPCA must triage and group its strategic priorities into workable smaller bundles to ensure successful execution, full stop. And that's why we're here asking the public for their help in prioritizing those strategic themes. That's what the goal of this slide is to execute, because it's going to be used to explain to the stakeholders what and why they're there when we're asking them for their input. So it's not just whether the themes are accurate, it's how do we prioritize. And that information I think is critical. To just delete it wholeheartedly out of the package takes away from that one other aspect of, are the themes right, yes or no, which one's a priority for you? Please let us know, because we can only do small bite-sized chunks as we go forward.
Okay, so just so to provide clarification, Member Quirk has provided you language that would be in place for page 7. Member Beatty.
Okay. My biggest concern is this piece. That piece, the blue, you're up against the wall if you try to do 7, that whole center piece should be removed.
Okay, so if you'd like to amend your amendment.
If we can agree that that piece be removed, I think I can live with the amendment.
Okay, so I'm going to give a courtesy. You're removing your original amendment to remove all of page 7. You'd like to put a different amendment on the floor in conjunction with Member Quirk's comments. So I'll allow you to do that right now.
Okay. And Tony's bringing me language. I agree.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So the amendment on the floor is to replace page 7 with new language. That new language has been passed on to Mr. McDonald, and for the benefit of the board, it removes that centerpiece, which is that graphic, and speaks more to a process of triaging, but without predefining what that triage is going to be.
Thank you.
Okay. So that amendment is on the floor for question or comments. Mr. McDonald?
Take this as easily implemented direction. The central point is to indicate to the public that we want not just your feedback on each individual strategic priority theme, but which ones are your relative priorities so we can group them for phased implementation.
Okay. Understood. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? And that's carried. Which brings us back to the original report. Again, for the benefit of the board, this is the one we're talking about right now. Are there any other amendments to this report moving forward? We have captured the friendly amendments as well. The word changes brought forward by Member Timms and certainly Member Joyner. I will separate these reports. This one is the first one on the floor right now. Can I get this amended document moved and put on the floor, please? Moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Diodati. All those in favor of the amended report? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. The next report I would like the board to consider is this report, NPCA 2018-2021 Strategic Plan, Draft NPCA Mandate and Mission Statements for consideration by the NPCA Board. For the benefit of the board, that's the one right there. Any questions or comments with respect to this? I know Member McPherson raised some questions with respect to vision. I know I raised some questions with respect to mandate. Our CEO has a question.
Yes, with respect to the draft mission statement, I believe it would read more accurately and certainly more, would be more, I guess, more accurate. If it was changed from to implement our Conservation Authorities Act mandate, currently it reads by, I would suggest it should read while remaining, because we do not implement it simply by doing these things, but we can continue to do these things. So I would suggest that, or ask that that word be changed to while.
What page are you looking at right now?
That's the actual last page of that document.
The last page of the document. Okay, so this is a board-driven process. While I respect the advice of our CAO, I will ask a member of a board to actually put that forward, and the board will accept that as a friendly amendment. So we're asking for a word change, and it's the last page, to implement our Conservation Authorities Act mandate. Presently it says by remaining a responsive, innovative, accountable, and financially sustainable organization. I'm hoping a board member will move that the word by be changed to while. Act mandate while remaining a responsive, innovative, accountable, and financially sustainable organization. I'll take that as a friendly amendment by the board, pass that on to Mr. McDonald. Everyone in agreement with that? Okay, thank you very much. That has been changed to while. Any other question or comments? Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The mandate statement is taken from the Act. And is it called mandate or is it called objects in the Act?
I believe it's...
I think it's called the objects of the Conservation Authority. Well, my point, it sounds a little semantics, but my point is that we are often, it's often misunderstood that we don't have, or misunderstood that our mandate includes slopes, slope stability, shoreline protection, erosion, and floodplain mapping. In our previous strategic plan presentation, we listed the quote from the Act, and then the things we are mandated by the province to do under separate legislation with a progression over the years. Mm-hmm. So we risk of saying our mandate statement is simply the very beginning, the objects of the Conservation Authority as stated in the Act, undermines the full mandate that we have, and it's been thrown at us many times, that your mandate is simply this. And the public seems to stop reading at that point. And where we get into most of our concerns about floodplain mapping, we're concerned about what we can and can't do on this on our Lake Erie shoreline or Lake Ontario shorelines. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice by limiting our mandate to that paragraph. So I'd like to hear what comments from the rest of the board on that and staff.
I'm going to go to board members first, and then I'm going to have our CEO make his comments. Member Quirk?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Member Timms for the conversation, to the comment. During the committee meeting where we talked about the mandate statement and how we were doing it. We did compare it with other mandate statements from other conservation authorities, which do tend to speak specifically to the object of the act, which establishes us, which, and I know Member Beattie and I have gone back and forth, the definition of a mandate is a legislated objective. So this is kind of where this word mandate comes from within the specifics of the act, and was taken, again, in consultation with what other conservation authorities have done it within their strategic plans. But the other part of that conversation is captured in the minutes of that meeting, is that the CAO would take to preparing sort of a primer, if you will, that captured those other regulated and other acts that direct us to do certain things, including memorandums of understanding. And if you look at the first page of our strategic plan, 2014 to 2017, it's kind of outlines those ones that are things that we have to do. And there would be a primer, as part of the approval of this, there would be a primer to explain that when it goes out for public consultation. But it wasn't incorporated into a specific mandate statement outside of anything that's in the objects of the act. That was the thoughts behind that process.
So thank you for that, Member Quirk. Mr. CAO, if you want to have a comment?
Thank you. Just want to add to that. I do appreciate the member's perspective, because our concern has always been that everyone who speaks about the mandate, when they do so, they speak incorrectly. No one seems to capture it very well. I think the high-level statement's good. Staff is working on a very, very technical, comprehensive primer that will clearly explain, both when we need technical references, what the mandate of the Conservation Authority is and what it is not as well. We're going to be very clear about that. We plan to have a technical document for that, and one that's a little more user-friendly for the general public, so that they can better understand the work we do. And we are working on that right now.
Okay, thank you for that. Member Timms, I'll go back to you as a courtesy.
Thank you, and I do appreciate the idea of keeping the mission or the mandate simple, but adding those 4 or 5 other words, I think, would hit the nail on the head in terms of legislated responsibilities. So, floodplain mapping, slope stability, and shoreline erosion would add to this comment without a whole lot of making it too much longer, but makes it clear, because you're saying the mandate, so you're not quoting the objects of the act specifically, but you're saying our mandate is. The mandate comes from the Conservation Authorities Act, but also comes from the 3 other acts that give us those responsibilities. And as Mark has mentioned, people don't get it, and I want them to get it through our mandate statement. So if we could add those to this statement, I don't think it adds too much to it, but it makes it clear.
Okay, so I'm going to recommend that's an amendment, understanding that this came from subcommittee. So any changes to it, I'm going to ask you to put those on the floor, and as a board, we'll either approve or not approve those recommendations. So, Member Timms, if you want to be very specific as far as what you want added.
Yes, I'll add then, and I do apologize to the subcommittee because I missed that meeting, and I'm sure I could have had this discussion there. But we would have just repeated it here again, I imagine. So I'd like to add the, where it says, and management of natural resources, can we add slope protection, soil erosion, shoreline erosion, and floodplain management?
So those 3.
And if we could...
slope protection,
yep.
Soil erosion.
Shoreline erosion.
Shoreline erosion.
And floodplain management.
Floodplain management.
And there may be slightly more accurate wording taken from those acts, but for now, this would work for me. Slope stability, okay.
Well, let's not wordsmith. Again, we take our language from the act itself. So I'm going to...
Yeah, slope stability comes from the act,
understanding
I
that
think.
it's an important issue. We've heard around the table that many times there's confusion. Let's not fuel that confusion by randomly putting things in there that may not be necessarily accurate. So I'm going to go to our staff and possibly Mr. Fertney to clarify Member Tim's amendments. Slope stability, shoreline erosion, and floodplain management.
Through you, Mr. Chair, those are terms that we can use in that. However, I'd like to look at those a little bit further with respect to the mandate if possible.
Okay. So again, I'm very hesitant to add language in this resolution that we have not qualified yet. So I'm wondering, and I'm putting it to the board, if there's a way to put something on the floor for this board to consider pending staff qualification. Member Quirk.
I don't want to get down in the weeds on the wordsmithing of this, but if I were to suggest to Councillor Timms that the mandate statement as it is stays where it is, and add the following, and I think this adds it, but add it as sort of a separate, I won't say paragraph, but point, I would just add the words and, semicolon after resources, and to regulate slope stability, shoreline erosion, and floodplain management as legislated. It keeps it as a distinct, what it does, it separates the mandate from the legislative mandate within the Conservation Act, as well as the regulatory and legislative obligations under the other acts.
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment. The mover has to accept it as well. Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would accept it as friendly with the caveat that the staff may be able to come back and put the wording a little more correctly according to the legislation, as Mr. Fertney has suggested. But the intention is clear, and just the terms may alter a little bit.
So the intention is to add those objectives or those objects. I understand. Okay, so any other question or comments? Member Timms, do you have a seconder?
Not yet. I request a seconder.
Oh, Member Beatty? Okay, so it's been seconded, duly seconded by Member Beatty. Question or comments? Member Beatty, to the amendment.
I'm speaking against the amendment. I will vote against the amendment. The committee spent a great deal of time trying to come up with a high-level mandate, and we deferred to the act. There's two parts in the act. One, the purposes, the other one, the objects. And this language comes right from the act. There's no room for misinterpretation. What you're starting here is you're starting to add to it. And we could probably sit down as we did in committee and say, you can add this, you can add this, you can add this, you can add this. That's when staff came up with the idea of the preamble. And the preamble is yet to come. It goes in the front of it. But this mandate is the act. It's in two places in the act, under purpose, under objects. It's quoted right from the act. And then the preamble, you can add according to this and this and this and this, because our mandate covers, if you start trying to quote everything that's in our mandate from all the different acts, this is not going to be a concise definition of mandate. And that's why we agreed to do the preamble and leave this as coming from the act. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Member Beatty. Any other question or comments to the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question to the amendment. All those in favor? Got it. Opposed? And the amendment carries. So I will put the entire document back on the floor now. Member Beatty?
If I may, Mr. Chair, just staying with the mandate statement, just a suggested word alignment change. It says undertake on a watershed basis. I think it would make more sense to simply say undertake programs and services in the watershed.
What page are you looking at?
It's not numbered. It's draft NPCA mandate to inform the 2018-21 strategic plan. Second to last page.
Okay.
So it's not changing it, it's changing the order of the words. That's all.
Okay, can I get that one more time then?
Take out on a watershed basis, so it would read undertake programs and services in the watershed.
Okay. I'm going to ask our staff if that's a fundamental change. Mr. CEO?
Yeah, I actually believe that that's, while both would be correct, one is more helpful, and that is on a watershed basis, because, again, people don't understand the jurisdiction, that we actually are governing or overseeing a watershed, and that's done on that basis, not just because it's a watershed within some unknown jurisdiction, but specifically, we do so on a watershed basis.
I don't have a problem with that wording per se, just the placement of it. Rather than reducing it to just watershed, if you want to say on a watershed basis, fine, put that after programs and services. Because the verb and the object should be side by side, and then the qualifying factor will come after it. So just change on a watershed basis from where it is to after the word services.
That's fine.
Okay. And again, I just want clarification that the language is appropriate and it doesn't cause more confusion.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll take that as a friendly amendment if everyone is in agreement to that language change. No. So we do have opposition to that. I'm going to ask Member Beatty to actually put that on the floor then and put it to the board for a vote. Do you have a seconder?
So moved.
Member Timms puts it on the floor. So again, for the benefit of the board, as prescribed by the Conservation Authorities Act, to establish and undertake on a watershed basis programs and services to further the conservation is the present language. Member Beatty's recommendation is, Member Beatty, if you want to read.
To establish and undertake programs and services on a watershed basis.
Okay, so it puts program and services ahead of watershed basis. Any question or comments to that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of that amendment? Opposed? And that's carried. Record that Member Beatty as a negative vote. Okay, I will put the entire document on the floor as amended. Member DeFrucio.
You're not going to like this.
Go ahead.
Putting zip lines in and all these other commercial things, that's not keeping to our mandate. Our mandate here is watershed basis programs and service to further conservation, restoration, development, and management of natural resources. And we're going to start wrecking trees and putting cables up.
Well, okay, so
Come on,
Member DeFrucio, I appreciate your comments, but we're speaking specifically to the mandate right now. That issue has already been dealt with, but we appreciate your comments. Any other question or comments to this document? I'll call the question. All those in favor? As amended? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you very much. The last document for the board's benefit is Have Your Say Strategic Plan Consultation. Any question or comments with respect to that document? Member Quirk. Moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Diodati. Questions or comments? Member Beatty.
I believe you're referring to the one with the calendar on the back?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that April 10, 17, 24, and May 1st are all sessions that will engage the public. We had a discussion at committee of the analog methodology for us old guys and the digital technology for the young guys. And it was to strike a balance. I just want assurance that the balance is there and that those four meetings will engage the public in a public meeting.
Okay, so that comment is passed on certainly to staff. I don't know if staff have any comments to Member Beatty's questions or concerns. Staff? Michael, go ahead.
Yes, the 3 sessions, April 10th, 17th, 24th, would be public town halls. We'd anticipate doing a presentation at these and have feedback stations for people to provide their feedback. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Member Beatty?
And the 1st of May, how does it differ?
That's sort of, through you, Mr. Chair, just a marker to say we have 2 more weeks of public consultation feedback where we may schedule face-to-face meetings. You'll notice, I think it's slide 2 or 3, we want people to identify how they want to be engaged with. So we're attempting to do as many face-to-face meetings and sort of adjust our tactics as we move along the process of public consultation to ensure we're giving them the avenues in how they want to engage with us.
And as in the past, when we go out to do this, be it the last strategic plan, be it the Welland River, be it Cave Springs, these events will be held at different places in the watershed?
Yes, that's correct. So we're planning one in each of the funding municipalities. So one in Niagara, Hamilton, and Haldimand.
Thank you.
Cork. Yeah. Indeed, correct. Okay, any other question or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receiving that. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm going to leave it up to the board whether or not we take a 5-minute break. We do have some more business to take care of. I think we can mow right through it if we're very conscientious. So a show of hands, those board members that would like to take a small break, those members that would like to carry on forward, and we will carry on forward. So the next item on the agenda is...
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
You voted on the package, right? But
Correct.
what I don't know is, did you confirm 17,
17, 18? This is the only thing we've passed right here.
37, 18, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's not, we haven't come to that yet. We haven't come to that yet. Oh, which one are you talking about then? Yeah. Yeah, so all I did was divide it up, but that, in its entirety, we basically covered every one of those up to this point, haven't we?
You did, except 37, 18 is a separate.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask a mover to put that forward. Member Quirk, that's on the floor. Member Beatty, all those in favor? Yes. Everyone got that? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Member Quirk and CAO. The next item on the agenda is, yes, 2 sets of minutes. So the first set of minutes, Strategic Planning Committee held on March 9th, 2018, that the Strategic Planning Committee minutes of the meeting held on March 9th, 2018 be approved as presented. I'll need a mover for those. Moved by Member Beatty, seconded by Member McPherson. Those minutes are on the floor for questions or comments. Member Quirk.
Just speaking to the process that we followed, the recommendations from those reports were to adopt those presentations, which we have just amended. So the minutes are being received, and the recommendations are for the reports as amended by the board 5 minutes ago.
Correct. Everyone got that? Good. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's approved. Thank you. Strategic Plan Committee, March 19th. That the Strategic Planning Committee minutes of the meeting held on March 19th be approved as presented. I'll need a mover for that. Member Quirk, second by Member Beatty. All those in favor? And that is carried as well. I'm going to need a mover for NPCA Strategic Planning Public Consultation Report number 37 we just did that one, the bang the drum, okay, sorry. Bang the table software, fantastic. Report tree top teching is done as well. Friends of 48 Creeks is done as well. The next report on the floor is 6.2.3, proposed Niagara River Ramsar designation. Report number FA 77-15. At this time, I'm going to be entertaining motions as far as the direction of this board moving forward. Some have been presented for you. First off, that report FA 77-15-17 respecting the proposed Niagara River Ramsar designation be received, and I will be entertaining any other motions moving forward on that one.
100 miles.
Member Quirk?
So at this point, you're just asking for the report to be received, but the recommendation is not to be approved. I move just receiving the report.
Just to
Given
receive the
Given the
report?
correspondence and the fact that Member Dart isn't here, I'm happy to just receive this report at this time.
Okay, so for receipt only, moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Joyner. All those in favor of receiving the report? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Lake Access Agreement Renewal, Catholic Youth Organization at Binbrook Conservation Authority. I'm going to put it on the floor that report number 3518 respecting Lake Access Agreement Renewal, Catholic Youth Organization Camp Marydale at Binbrook Conservation Authority be received, and that the NPCA Board authorize staff to enter into an access agreement attached to report 3518 as Appendix 1 with the Catholic Youth Organization to utilize a dock on Lake Neopenco within the Binbrook Conservation Area. I need a mover for that. Moved by Member Beatty. Second by Member Maloney. Question or comments to that report? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried as well. The next item on the agenda is 6.2.5, Watershed Floodplain Committee, Draft Terms of Reference and Selection Process. I will need a mover to put, 1, that report number 3618 respecting the NPCA Watershed Floodplain Committee Draft Terms of Reference be received. 2, that the NPCA Watershed Floodplain Committee Draft Terms of Reference attached to report number 3618 as Appendix 1 be approved, and 3, that the NPCA Board immediately proceed to the selection process for the purposes of identifying board membership on the NPCA Watershed Floodplain Committee, and lastly, that the following board members be appointed to the NPCA Watershed Floodplain Committee effective immediately. Okay, so we're going to just do a straw vote right now to see who wants to be put on that board, and then we're going to add that to the resolution. Is there terms of reference as far as numbers?
No, it's minimum.
Minimum 5. Okay, so going around the table, Member Timms, congratulations. Member Joyner. Oh, Member Jeffs, she has, okay, Member Jeffs, Member Joyner, Member Beatty, Member Beatty. Any? Yep.
Is it the intention to follow up with the 40 Creek floodplain mapping?
40 Creek of whiskey or 40?
Exactly. 40 Creek at this term of by the end of this year.
So the question is it the intent?
Is the 40 Creek floodplain mapping on our work plan for 2018?
Through your chair, yes, the two proposed floodplain mapping projects will be included in this term.
Okay, so I'd like to put my name on it.
Okay, Member Quirk as well. How many is that?
6.
We have 6, and what are the terms of reference? Minimum 5, okay. So automatically, yes, so myself and the Vice Chair. Seeing no other volunteers, yep, Member Joyner?
Sure, I volunteered Member Jeffs. She isn't here right now. She's just out of the room. Perhaps maybe we should just do a follow-up to make sure that she's okay.
Okay, so I will commit to this. If Member Jeffs wants to sit on the board, we will certainly add her name. If she changes her mind and doesn't, we will remove her.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Member Timms, you have a question?
Questions to the process. No question about the board appointees, but the proceed with the selection process for identifying what's the other membership. And I think we had committed that we would advise the rest of the public members on the committee of that we were appointing who wants to continue to serve. Are there any changes in that? So what's the process for addressing the public members of the committee? I know you're dealing with the board members at the moment, but in this resolution, I think it starts to deal with the public members.
So I think that process has already been established, but for the benefit of Member Timms, Member Quirk, did you have something to say to it?
Sorry, Chair, just for you to Member Timms, I see under the membership it says additional citizen members can be included at the discretion of the full committee. And I go back to the whole idea that the floodplain committee is a direction of this board, but individual water courses that are being undertaken, we might want a certain person who's going to sit on it representing the issues and interests of the people that are affected directly, as opposed to having a specific, like we did a Welland River floodplain committee, and this sort of made the committee itself more generic, but then to allow for input and membership on sort of, as I've envisioned, subcommittees of this committee dealing with the individual waterways. That's how I was looking at it, and that's why I wanted to participate with respect to what was going on if 40 Mile Creek was involved.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, my question is about the, under the terms of reference, there's membership. We'll also include one voting member from the Welland River Floodplain Association, 2 non-voting members from the same association, and an additional citizen memberships may be included. So I just want to be sure that the association is advised and that we have a process where we check with them and who's available and who's serving. Okay. And that members that have good attendance and members that have bad attendance at the committee should be asked if they wish to continue. So take that as a staff direction.
Yep, staff direction. If they haven't yet already been informed and notified, we'll make sure that we do that, Member Tim. So thanks for bringing that forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So the board has been populated. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. The next item on the agenda is 6.2.6, Meeting and Agenda Management Solution. This is an update to report number 2318. So if you recall, this item was deferred from the February 28th Full Authority Board meeting, and it has everything to do with eScribe. So we do have gentlemen in the audience. Jeff? Okay, so maybe Jeff, if you just want to come forward. I don't know if members of the board will have any questions, but it's always a good opportunity to get you up at the podium anyways. I'm going to put the following resolution on the floor. I'll need a mover and a seconder for it. That updated report number 2318 respecting the meeting and agenda management solution be received. That eScribe software solution option 2 highlighted in appendix 1 to updated report number 2318 be approved as the NPCA meeting and agenda management solution. And 3, that the following costs associated with option 2 highlighted in appendix 1 to updated report number 2318 be funded from the general capital reserve. And you see the totals there, eScribe, accessibility bundle with YouTube integration. I'll need a mover for that. Moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Joyner. That report is on the floor for question or comments. Going back to Member Quirk.
Chair, just through you, I'd like to apologize to Jeff because when we moved all the other ones with people waiting in the audience, I didn't realize that you were also sitting waiting to speak to this. So I'm just going to apologize to you now. We could have dealt with this earlier, but I'm happy to support and thank you for getting the additional information.
No worries.
Member Beatty, and then Member Diodati.
A couple of questions regarding alternate costs. Most of the members here are members of government and would have a device that's appropriate for eScribe. Are there members that don't have a device at all? And if so, has that been taken into account in terms of costing? And the second part of costing is, this is going to displace other costs, such as courier, such as production of paper, etc., secretarial time. Have we got an estimate of, we're spending $23,500 or $23,750 in the first year, how much financing is being displaced by the acquisition of this software?
Went off on me. Sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't looked at those kind of numbers yet. We were looking at getting it approved for the back end use on the what do you call it, on the agenda prep side. So that was our primary focus on making a recommendation with it moving forward.
That being said, Mr. Chair, I would move that we defer this motion until those bits of information are known. That's the capital acquisition cost required for members who don't have equipment. And secondly, what are the cost factors or time factors that are being displaced by the acquisition?
Okay, so I'm just going to provide some clarity to the board right now. There are 2 options right now with respect to this issue. The first one has been moved by Member Quirk. In the event that fails, and I will put that to a board, the other option is that updated report number 2318 respecting the meeting and agenda management solution be received, and that staff be directed to procure an agenda management solution that evaluates both eScribe and alternatives. So those are the two options that have been presented in the report, but right now there is one option that's been put on the floor for question or comments. I do have a deferral on the floor. Having said what I've just said, Member Beatty, would you still like to put the deferral on this particular item forward, or would you rather wait to see the will of the board?
As far as receiving this information, basically receiving it, I'm fine with proceeding with that. I'm not fine with proceeding with action on it until we have that requested information.
Okay. Does the second option, does that address your concerns? If that was to move forward? Because I would make the recommendation that this one be allowed to stand, and in the event that it fails, then the second option be put on the floor, and maybe that would better serve.
I'm not reading it that way, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I have a deferral on the floor. Date and time?
Next meeting.
Next meeting. So we will address the deferral right now. I will put it to speaking to date and time.
Date and time only, Chair. I think that we're trying to find a solution here, but the Member Beatty raises a good point where that we do have members that don't have access to the same equipment that makes it easier for the regional councillors to tie in with the eScribe program. I'm wondering if the deferral for this should actually be to the next budget cycle to look for solutions for the next, for 2019 board, as opposed to trying to shoehorn something into our budget this year. So that's my question, is maybe the deferral should be to our budget discussions for 2019.
Okay, so that's more of a referral than to budget? But, okay, now you need a seconder. Can I assume you want to second that, Member Joyner, then? So duly seconded. So the deferral is on the floor to Budget Committee. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. So there'll be no more further action on that one. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your time. The next item on the agenda, there are no in-camera sessions. Notice of motion, Member Beatty and Member Kaspersets have a notice of motion coming forward. The clerk has received that, Member Beatty. We can, oh, okay, so, yeah, at your earliest opportunity, please pass it on to the clerk. You've made notice of motion, which means it will be on the agenda for the next board meeting, okay? New business, 9.1. Conservation Ontario has advised that voting delegates must be appointed by the Conservation Authority. This is a yearly renewal process. By virtue of the chair, he is the voting delegate. I do need a surrogate or an alternative in the event that I cannot vote. At this time, the vice chair is the first alternate. I need a second alternate. So in the past, Member Timms has taken on that role as second alternate, but I will leave it up to the discretion of the board. Can I have a show of hands as far as who wants to be second alternate? Member Joyner?
I would like to put forward Member Timms as a second alternate.
I'd take it as friendly, but that's fine. As far as formalizing the process, all those in favor? Member Timms, congratulations, you are the second alternate. Okay, so now I need the following motion to be approved, that the following individuals be selected as the 2018 Conservation Authority of Ontario voting delegates and alternates. Myself as the voting delegate, Member Kaspersets as the first alternate, and Member Timms as the second alternate. That's on the floor. Moved by Member Quirk, second by Member Joyner. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. There are no other new business items, I don't think, unless I'll leave it up to the board. Any items of Member Diodati?
Thank you, Chair. I know we referred our last report. There was something missing, I thought, from the report. I just want a direction of staff, is that I'd ask them to look into other programs, because eScribe we've been having a lot of problems at the region, still to this day. I get my agendas printed. I can't even use the program. So why we'd be going into a program that's not working at the region, and I'm going to bring that up at the region as well, At the Parks Commission, we use leading boards, and it's much simpler, much cleaner, and we've yet to have a problem with it. So I'm not suggesting it be leading boards. There's other programs out there that are better, that actually are working currently. So I hope staff would come back with alternatives. That did not happen in that report.
So I'm going to concur with Member Diodati, because I do recall that was board direction that we gave to staff as far as come back with some alternatives. If the CEO wants to speak to that, but I was hoping for those alternatives as well. Mr. CEO?
Yeah, just to be clear, one of the options in there was to actually go to RFP so that we could find out, get more information about them. So that would obviously be the appropriate way if that's your direction. So we can prepare those, the presentation and all the costs related, but our recommendation, should you wish to go that way, would be to go the RFP route.
Okay, so it's been referred to committee, but I would suggest that it doesn't have to be a formalized RFP process to go out to the marketplace in order to investigate what other opportunities or options are out there and bring that information back to the board. So that is staff direction. I'm hoping going to budget committee that those opportunities and certainly those options will be presented to budget committee at that time. So thank you, Member Diodati, for bringing that forward, because I agree. Any other business? Seeing none, I'll need a mover to adjourn. Moved by Member Joyner, second by Member Diodati. All those in favor? Carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, board members.